Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm Blair Monk. I'm a design principal for Aurecon, practicing in the area of network operations. So I've been with the ITS New Zealand since 2004, so I've been around for a long time. And we've got a great lineup of three other directors of ITS New Zealand this morning who've recently been to the ITS World Congress in Los Angeles. So we've got Lee McKenzie, Mike Rudge, and Doug Wilson. So first up on the podium this morning will be Lee McKenzie. Now, Lee is the manager of future transport at Waka Kotahi, New Zealand Transport Agency. And she's been in the transport business for over 10 years. She transitioned from law and policy work before that, and she's been a director of ITS New Zealand since. Please, whoops, welcome to the stage, Lee McKenzie. Forward, back, pointy stick.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so kia ora koutou katoa. It's an absolute pleasure to actually be standing up and presenting to so many familiar faces. I've recently, with a number of people in this room, been presenting at a number of conferences, and there's something really nice about when you stand up and you see so many people that you know in front of you. The first thing I want to do is actually apologise for my no-show yesterday at the panel, the innovation panel. Apologies to my panel members and also to the rest of you. You know the reason why, and I got a lot. Plenty of people gave me a hard time yesterday about that. So apologies from me. The one thing I did just want to say in relation to that was, if I can move these slightly. I'm not here to talk about the innovation program. I just wanted to say that I am actually really proud and really excited about our innovation program at Waka Kotahi. Nothing to do with what's on the slide at the moment. And I just wanted to briefly mention that I know there was a focus yesterday on collaboration and collaboration with the private sector, with industry, with communities, with research institutions, and I just wanted to say that's what our innovation program is about, and that's what we're trying to build out and develop. We've started with the fund. A lot of you know about the fund, and that's very much about supporting the private sector to develop and accelerate innovative solutions for transport. We're really excited about the results from the first challenge round, and you will hear who's been successful from that challenge round later on this week when the Minister makes an announcement on Thursday. The second thing I just wanted to say in relation to that was the next phase is, and I've talked to a number of people here over yesterday, is that we're looking at how we can develop some kind of real-world test environment in New Zealand, again in collaboration with the sector, with research institutions, with communities. So that's what I want to say about that, because that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm actually here to talk about my recent attendance at the ITS World Congress in LA with fellow board members Mike Rudge and Doug Wilson. I've been to World Congresses before, but the main reason for me attending this time was actually to represent ITS New Zealand as a board member at the various board meetings, both Asia Pacific and World Congress meetings. And in particular, it was to vote for which country would host the ITS World Congress in 2026. Fred, I don't know if Fred's in the room. Oh, yep, there he is, Fred. Fred was also at this particular meeting. I think I can best describe it as it was a tough day. It was a day-long meeting, and it was not easy. And it was tense, very tense at times. That's probably, I'm just going to leave it there. The two countries vying to host the World Congress were Korea and Taiwan, and at the end of the day, Korea was successful. So they'll be hosting the ITS World Congress in 2026. So just a little bit about the World Congress. I think, Michael, you talked yesterday about, was it Europe EV or someone talked about Europe EV and how, I think that was a congress someone mentioned yesterday, and how big that was in terms of numbers. The World Congress is a big conference, 6,500 plus attendees, not the biggest I've been to. Melbourne was about 10,000. 64 countries, about 750 speakers. I've got a few stats up there, 205 sessions, 211 exhibition companies, one presenter, that was me. So really encourage people to look out for World Congresses and actually, look out for when they're calling for abstracts, and actually put in some abstracts. We need more representation at these World Congresses and at the Asia Pacific events as well. Definitely one case of COVID, that was also me, and I'm sure there were others. And I'm astounded, given the number of people I hugged at the end of the conference, that I haven't heard about more cases of COVID. So anyway, that was the World Congress's gift to me. My next slide, I just want to focus a little bit on the themes from the Congress. And there was the usual sessions that focused, and you can see there, on connected and automated vehicles, mobility as a service. But the thing that was really, I guess, struck me was actually some of the new themes that were coming through. And we've already heard a lot about equity over the last day. That was a theme at the Congress. And the other one that struck me was the technology from entry to the last mile. So we're starting to hear a lot. We've already been talking a lot in recent conferences, and there's a lot of discussion around first mile, last mile in relation to public transport. That was one of the challenges we put out for the Innovation Fund. But there's also a lot of discussion happening around last mile, in particular in relation to urban freight. So that came through as a really strong theme. So what I decided to do was actually focus on equity and seamless mobility. I did get the opportunity to attend a number of sessions. I heard concepts like transit deserts. You may be familiar with that. It's not something we talk about much in New Zealand, but transit deserts are areas that contain large amounts of transit-dependent people with limited automobile access, and where transit services do not adequately fit the demand. And there was also a lot of discussion around people being left behind. And in the States, in particular, they talked about new immigrants who face isolation and social exclusion, health impacts, barriers to services and employment through the inability to access transport services, and sometimes just because of a language barrier. And there was also a session I went to that talked about older rural adults and people ageing in rural places who will face real transport challenges through a lack of mobility options, and people whose preferred method of transport tends to be the motor vehicle. There were also a lot of presentations that featured mobility on demand and on-demand transport, and the role it can play in meeting the needs of communities that are not well served by traditional public transport. And there were numerous examples given about the positive results we're starting to see from the increasing number of trials of on-demand and deployment as well. But the thing I just wanted to talk about briefly was, again, a new concept for me. Did I just jump one over? Let's go back. Yep. Which is universal basic mobility. Not a term I was familiar with. And basically that's about mobility as being a fundamental human right. So really what it's about is that everyone, regardless of income, should have the right to safe, reliable, affordable transport and options as well. And it particularly focuses on the gaps in the underrepresented, and it's about accessibility, choice and connectivity. Apologies, I don't have a lot of pretty pictures up here, but I thought some of this information was really important to share. And linked to this concept is also the concept of the mobility wallet. Again, something new for me. If you look at the description of the mobility wallet on screen, it's not dissimilar to mobility as a service. A payment tool that can be used for public transport to make trip payments easier and seamless. The goal is one payment for multiple trips. But the thing that's different about the mobility wallet is that it's government funded, and it allows governments to add funds to the wallet. That's different to what we're seeing in relation to mobility as a service. So one of the trials that's underway is a mobility wallet pilot in LA. And again, I was really lucky to spend half a day with LA Metro. Thank you to the Victorian Department of Transport who set that up. And that was an absolutely awesome session. I love LA Dot and I love LA Metro, and the reason I love those organisations is because of the work that they do in the innovation space and the work that they do with communities. They're really community oriented. So they do things like they commission artworks from communities that they then have in metro stations. They have a car share arrangement in LA, which is called LA Blue, which is developed from a French scheme, but it's a car sharing scheme where the cars are placed in low socioeconomic neighbourhoods. And they also they work really closely with community groups to actually deliver new transport solutions. So they use community organisations who are respected and engaged with their communities to actually deliver the solutions. In terms of the mobility wallet pilot, I've got a lot of stats up there, but basically they are going to fund 2,000 residents with a mobility wallet or a payment card. They're going to put $150 a month onto that card, which is actually not an insignificant amount of money. They were just starting to call for people or asking people to apply for that wallet while we were there, or it could have been this month. And you also see a stat up there, which is around 30% of the 370,000 residents in South LA actually live below the poverty line. So they've got huge issues in terms of accessing transport, which obviously has a flow-on effect, and actually they pay more for transport as well. You can also see in the last paragraph on that slide that the things that the debit card can be used to pay for, essentially public transport, but also private mobility options such as shared e-scooters, e-bikes, car share, ride-hailing and taxis. Basically the money can't be spent for gas or maintenance of a privately owned motor vehicle. And that pilot's not the only one in the States. There's also one in Portland, Oregon, which is called the Transportation Wallet, which is for affordable housing residents. Pittsburgh has a monthly transit subscription, and Oakland also provides $300 on prepaid debit cards for 500 residents. Following on, same theme in terms of equity and seamless mobility, I attended a gender equity and transport workshop. That was a half-day workshop. Again, a great workshop to attend. Some of the speakers were very senior women who hold very senior roles in a number of transport agencies in the States. I don't know if you can. I think you can see the stats. Sorry, that was a photo I took. Some of you may be familiar with these stats, but just a couple I wanted to highlight. Increased fatalities. Women are 17% more likely to die in a car crash. I don't know if anyone saw on the news the other night a woman who was on TV with, you're nodding, with the crash test dummy. I was surprised. I thought that had happened a long time ago, that a crash test dummy had actually been designed for women. And according to that item, it's only just happening, which is pretty shocking in 2022. The other thing is you'll see up there that women spend twice as much time taking transportation as men. They often in the mornings take 2 trips. Sometimes that's in relation to childcare. And then they go on to work and they might be travelling in different directions. And women also pay twice as much to take transport as men. And there was a survey done in the room, just some questions around, how many of you in the room have chosen a more expensive transport option because for safety reasons, for example. And there were a number of other questions asked as well, and the hands went up all the time. I don't know if Tristan's here from Liftango. I can't see him, but shout out to Tristan from Liftango who was in the room. So there were a number of men in the room as well. It wasn't a woman-only event. And I've also just put up there the description about, it's commonly known as the pink tax in relation to women paying more for transport. It's something I'm really interested in. If you're interested in reading more about it, look up Sarah Kaufman from Rudge University, who's done a lot of work in this area. And then lastly, on a slightly different nature, but again, still around equity, I just wanted to talk about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in the States. So it was passed in 2021. I think it was a bill passed in 2021. I don't want to talk about the $1.2 trillion for infrastructure. That was talked about a lot at the Congress. It was a very big thing. Nor do I want to talk about the $350 billion for highway programs, so that's very much about repair and maintenance on physical infrastructure. What I was really interested in was the scheme that the Act has also enabled, which is around, and I'm just going to read it out, it's a scheme to remove barriers to connecting communities and improving mobility and access to economic opportunities. It's about reconnecting communities. And we all know that freeways and major highways literally cut communities in half. Not only that, freeways and highways also can cause significant harm for the residents who live around those freeways, so the health impacts from pollution, for example. So this is very much about funding communities to reconnect them, and you'll see that there are examples in here of, so the sort of things that might receive funding are things like removing infrastructure, putting in pedestrian walkways and overpasses, redesigning roadways and complete streets, and main street revitalisation. For me, and that's a $1 billion program, but for me that was really significant that that's actually been built into that legislation. That's my second to last slide. I just wanted, oh, you're going to stop. I've got 1 minute. Awesome, that's the best I've ever done. Except for you just interrupted me. So last slide, really quickly, just moving away from equity and seamless mobility. I've got up on the slide some of the international events that are coming up. My role on the ITS New Zealand board is actually I think my title is Director of International Events, actually. That might be what it is. But so just up there you can see, Fred mentioned the CESTA as well. The next probably significant event coming up is the ITS Australia Global Summit. That's being held in Melbourne in August next year. The next Congress is in China, in Suzhou again. Fred mentioned yesterday there still may be some difficulties in people attending that conference. We've got an ITS Asia Pacific conference coming up in Jakarta. And then the next ITS World Congress, the 2024 ITS World Congress is in Dubai. So again, absolutely encourage you to look out for those events. If you see a call for abstracts, give it a go. We'd love to see more New Zealanders at these events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee McKenzie. All right, next up we have Mike Rudge, who, there he is, owner of Rudge Consulting, 30 years in the transport area, from planning through to asset management, and also chair of ITS New Zealand. Please welcome Mike.
Thanks, Blair, and thanks, Lee, for leading me into this. It's part of the reason Lee and I also attended was to start our positioning for the ITS Asia Pacific Summit in 2025. So I'm going to talk about what we did there. I'm going to talk about some trials in rural roads that have occurred, particularly in Iowa. Integrated corridor management and the need to start to think about infrastructure receiving standards and maintenance costs. So as Lee showed up there, the next ITS Asia Pacific Forum is in Jakarta in 2024, but we put in a proposal to win that. And were unsuccessful, and there were probably a number of reasons for that. One is that we didn't actually know that many people on the board because of COVID. Lee and I were new to all the connections, and also Jakarta had actually put up proposals twice before, so it was their third shot. So we felt it important that we actually get to the World Congress so that we could actually meet the Asia Pacific board members who will vote on this, and start the positioning for this. I think it went pretty well. We had a number of countries saying that they would vote for us. I don't know that Singapore has made that commitment yet, Fred, but maybe after today. The final vote is in April 23, and it's actually going to be at a virtual meeting. So. I think we did pretty well in terms of getting to that point, and that will be a big event. Between 600 and 1,000 people we would expect. We are positioning for that to be in Christchurch in 23, we've identified some themes and speakers already so that we can put that up as a proposal. So I think put that in your diary already. When we put our proposal in April 23, a final proposal, we'll have dates and more, and that will quickly get disseminated to people. So I want to talk about rural road trials. And one paper in particular, well, it was actually presented a couple of times in different ways, and the work that we've done already to follow up on that. Most of the trials that you hear about at these conferences are focused on urban issues. And they're in very controlled environments. But in New Zealand, we have a bigger percentage of vehicle kilometres travelled in our rural areas. Our rural fatality rates are much higher, and that's the same around the world in general. And the traffic mix on rural highways and roads is quite different. I mean, we've all had to follow a tractor, and in some places we've all had to stop for stock. And so it was really encouraging to see what the University of Iowa are doing. They've got a circuit, 47 miles. It's paved and unpaved. It's got 4 lanes, 2 lanes, and obviously road marking and no road marking. It's got some traffic signals and controlled and uncontrolled access. It sounds pretty familiar to what we have to put up with. So they purpose-built a vehicle using some of the latest technology. It takes drivers and passengers. They take biometric studies of both the drivers and the passengers to see how they react to certain situations. Detailed questionnaires. They've completed 40 circuits, and the first circuit was pretty much all manual, and then slowly the vehicle learnt. By what they call their phase 3, 93% of the journey was automated, and they've still got to do phase 4 and phase 5 of the study, and they're pretty confident they'll get to 100%. But they've got lots of lessons, and they're not going to surprise anyone here. Off-the-shelf automation is years away, and if anyone's read the articles in the paper that's in the last couple of days, that's no surprise. The global automation behaviours don't adapt well to rural roads. They don't deal with blind corners and hills. They struggle with some of the changing weather patterns, and they struggle with changing widths and side access, whether that's a driveway or whatever. So they have created a digital twin for that 47-mile route, but they've had to trick it. They've had to pretend the alignment is a little bit different to keep the vehicle in its path as it goes around some of those corners. Otherwise it will cross the centre line and create all sorts of danger. They've also had to change the speed limit within that so that the vehicle will actually adjust its speed to an appropriate speed. Otherwise it will try and go 50 or 60 kilometres an hour on a road that's very windy. But that's what they've been doing as they've been going through those phases to be able to get that driving into a more automated, up to that 93%. They've had a problem with intersections and the slow startup of the vehicles because these vehicles are very cautious. So when they get to an intersection, they can take 3 or 4 stops and starts before they will get across the intersection, which, as you can imagine, is pretty frustrating for drivers who are trying to work out what the hell is going on with that other crazy vehicle. But their conclusion was automation can work, but it's going to take a long time in individual areas to make it work, particularly if you want to be able to deal with some of the mobility on demand type things with driverless capabilities. The lessons for New Zealand, I think I'm seeing lots of nods of the head, that they're all there, but we probably need to start to think about similar trials to be able to make these things work. But the good thing is we can build on what the University of Iowa has done. Doug and I have already had meetings with them. They are freely exchanging information, what they've done in terms of the trial. Some of that data we might not need to collect again, but we can focus on our own data and what have you. So I think that's really encouraging that someone's already doing this. It's really encouraging that the data is there to share, and it means that we don't have to repeat some of those lessons. But if we're going to create a digital twin, we're going to have to probably work out exactly what that digital twin looks like in some of these rural areas, and that's probably the biggest part of the equation in terms of setting up something that will be viable. I'll talk a little bit about on-demand mobility. Lee's already spoken about it. One of the things that was really interesting was the trials were all saying pretty much the same thing, that it was successful in terms of getting new ridership, and that in general that you could get more rides for the same dollar as what the big buses that were the on-demand systems were generally replacing. So this seems to be something that we should be working out how to quickly roll out in New Zealand without necessarily doing a lot more trials and things, just move to implementation. And the other thing that was quite interesting really was that the funding for these, they will never be self-funding. We know that, but the benefits lie in health, preservation of communities, and local commercial benefits. And so we need to think about how we actually fund these things. Where does the money come from? Is it just going to be a transport bucket, or should some of the other social development buckets come into play? Developments in integrated corridor management. When I was with Stantec, I had quite a lot to do with some of the people that were working in this area in Contra Costa and in Dallas. There were 3 original trials, one in Contra Costa, one in San Diego, and one in Dallas. And this is basically where you try and get the whole transport network along a corridor to operate as one, rather than have I kind of look at the Great South Road here and the Southern Motorway, rather than have them operate separately, and have the traffic control systems dynamically manage the flow between the 2 networks so that you optimise the use of the network. The Dallas trial also tried to integrate into the use of the metro and the rail system, which was parallel. All of those original trials showed significant benefits in terms of congestion reduction and network efficiency, and so as part of this $12 trillion investment, there are actually quite a few new integrated corridor implementations going on, and the main ones that were talked about were in Tennessee, and I'm trying to read that sign, it's hard to read them all. Tennessee, Virginia, and thank you, California. Thank you. And they were all going quite well, but one of the things that they really stressed was that this is the hardest work is getting all the agencies to agree on what they're trying to achieve. And sometimes that took up to 2 years, right at the beginning of the project. So it's about what are we actually trying to achieve for this network, and how, I've got not much more time. So and the need to align all the organisation's objectives right at the beginning of the project so that you could line up all the traffic control systems and things to try and optimise the meeting of all those objectives. The PT issues were difficult to achieve because what they tried to do in Dallas was basically let people know early that there were hold-ups and they should perhaps get PT, but generally they couldn't let them know early enough. Data sharing and integration across all organisations was problematic, but improving. The V2X and V2V technologies were allowing more data to come in and therefore giving more opportunities for AI to work. They did have a problem with Google because most people preferred route selection tool was Google Maps, and Google doesn't share very well with the traffic control centres, so they still needed to work through that. So things were moving along. The use of AI in their traffic control systems is definitely increasing, and I've got to finish. So I think I can. Yeah. Thank you. Are we having questions at the end, or? Yeah.
Don't have a question. No, that's all right. We'll talk after.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mike. Remind everybody that the presentations today will be online and available to you, and questions, please hit up Lee, Mike and Doug afterwards about any questions you've got about the ITS World Congress. So next up is Doug Wilson. He's Associate Professor in Transport Engineering at the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering at the University of Auckland. Director of University of Auckland Transportation Research Centre, and he's been an ITS board member since 2018. Please welcome Doug Wilson.
Thank you, Blair. I'm going to give you some snapshots really of not just the ITS World Congress, but a bit of a review or pre-study that we actually undertook with the ITS Australia team. So we'll hopefully some pictures to keep you awake as well, given following on. So thank you, Lee and Mike, for sort of setting the scene of this. So the sort of things that I'm going to talk about is hopefully to focus on slightly different things to what was actually on in the program of the ITS World Congress. You'll see the many different areas, and there's no way we can go through and do a full review of everything that was undertaken at the World Congress. But there's some personal snapshots of some thoughts that I think are very relevant to New Zealand as we go forward. Should also shout out to Sujith, who's hiding behind the sign there, you might just see. So Sujith Padiara in the back there, who sort of is part of our Transport Research Centre, was with me there, and we had some great conversations. So he converts the technology language to me so that I understand it, and then we can start to figure out what we can do with it, which is a great joint conversation. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the Michigan study tour that was organised by ITS Australia there and Roads Australia. So we got invites to join that, which actually was 2 days prior to, so it was the week before the ITS World Congress, and 2 days of visits that also aligned with the Detroit Auto Show. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of those things, so and specifically around Detroit and some of the study tour that we did. That culminated with a number of different things that were over those 2 days, which was a very well organised study tour, which was hugely beneficial actually, and we learned a lot from the conversations and discussions around that aspect of it. So that was very, very, very useful, and a shout out to ITS Australia and Roads Australia who organised that for us. We were very well welcomed by the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. You will see some of the reasons why they are working so hard to try to attract people to their area in terms of their state and to the city, because they've got some significant issues that are very different to some of the cities around the world, but they've set up some really nice things with that. So firstly, some snapshots, Detroit Auto Show. Well, as a mobility person, it's kind of scary going to a Detroit Auto Show when you see some of the things that people will want people to have around there. I mean, it's all about OEMs being original equipment manufacturers trying to sell their next vehicle. I mean, everything is big money, and when you see the investment that is going to there, and when we're talking about Midwest US, it is still very much dominated in internal combustion engine and as big as vehicles as possible. Fuel prices are still not really changing that in the Midwest. And so I think you've got to take a bit of grain of salt with some of these things. So now they are talking about transport decarbonisation, but they show an example of a Hummer that is electric. So think about the size of the battery that's just to run a Hummer, and the Ford 150 utes and everything else that are coming. So they do have their purposes, and obviously they've got the funds to be able to do some of the research, so some good things that they can show. So some real cool technologies that are there, but really it's about selling vehicles, and more vehicles, the more the better, obviously, and that's part of the things I think that's keeping price high in terms of some of the electric vehicle options that we're considering, is that that's not coming down as fast as it should. But there was a good section this time around future mobility at the Detroit Auto Show, which was good. So lots of nice sort of cutaways of vehicles to be able to see the technology, and just to be able to see the amount of technology that's going into vehicles these days, the number of computers, the number of sensors, the number of things that are helping in terms of safety, and having strong safety outcomes in some of these areas is actually really, really good. So there is really good things for that. One of the things I want to point out here, Detroit, maximum population in the 1950s, almost 1.85 million people. Now the city has 670,000. They've lost 2/3 of their population. They've got massive social issues because there's just empty buildings, empty houses, boarded up land areas. Land is cheap as at the moment, and so they're looking and encouraging huge investments into Detroit because they've lost all these manufacturing jobs and opportunities. And so massive changes that are occurring, but it's now an opportunity for them to reinvest and redo some of those things, but they need significant investment to do that. So I'm going to talk about one of the centres that we visited there, the American Centre for Mobility, which is comprised of government, industry and academic organisations to accelerate that mobility industry through research, testing, standards development, educational programming. So it's a large centre. It's a joint initiative between, as I say, the state. It's also getting significant federal funding as well into that centre. And so when you look at the resourcing and the funding for it, it's mind-boggling for New Zealand. And we have to think about scale in terms of New Zealand, but we need to actually look at what is appropriate for New Zealand going forward. So it's a partnership between those sort of areas that you can see there to be able to test, try, learn, evaluate, monitor, all of these aspects to be able to provide that collaboration space together to work together. There's the sort of the main campus of what they're doing, which is 500 hectares of space, which is repurposed areas, which has, as you can see in that diagram, rural roads, off-roads, sort of unsealed roads, but like the Iowa one that Mike just talked about. There's areas of that. There is high-speed alignments, up to 55 miles per hour for testing. It's alongside an old repurposed airport, so they've got lots of space and lots of different areas. And they've got centres where industry can come in and work with them and trial different things. So got a really good structure of being able to learn. So it is a safe platform for the integration and testing and validation of all these the different areas for connected and autonomous vehicles, but also for trialling out innovation in terms of connected 5G networks, etc. And there's a lot of ability to learn and to evaluate where it's appropriate in these areas. They've done a lot of demonstrations and showcasing, and when you see the number of visitors they've had through the centres, it's like 5,000, more than 5,000 people internationally from all around the world that are actually seen. So they are seen as a centre in the US for mobility, not just for the state of Michigan. But you see, in terms of repurposed land area, it is a public-private partnership that's not-for-profit rather. So when you look at that, 200 million investment into the infrastructure, the facilities and the equipment. On top of that, there's another $40 million that is each year that they put up basically for related research programs on that. So the number of companies that are involved in that centre is over 500 plus companies, industries working and coming in and trialling different things. Now, I'm using this obviously, it's an example. I'm not saying it's the scale is right for New Zealand, but I think what we need to think about in New Zealand is what is the appropriate management governance. We tend to do things quite well when we get on and do them in New Zealand, but we need to actually have the leadership and governance for those areas. So that's as an example. Part of the American Centre for Mobility as well, there was a Detroit smart parking lab, which sounded pretty boring, and I sort of thought, what are we going to learn about that from here? But actually, it was actually quite very interesting. So there actually was a parking building, and they were demonstrating bespoke equipment that you could set in the actual, as one example, within the parking building that would take over control of vehicles as they came in and basically automate parking and also potentially charging, electric vehicle charging, so that you don't have to have one vehicle parking in a vehicle taking over a wireless charging mechanism for the whole time. You could basically switch out vehicles in and out. So some really interesting ideas that were coming from some of those areas. And Witricity was one of the partners there that we're working with in terms of wireless power, inductive power transfer, charging electric vehicles. Other thing I want to talk about is Detroit Central Station. So Detroit Central Station, if you know, was one of the largest at the time in the 1920s. You can see on the right there. It's an 11-storey central station. It was the largest in the world in terms of a train station when it was built. And for the last 20 years, it's been derelict, never been used, and basically it was flooded. The bottom stories were all flooded. So they're emptying it out. And Ford are investing. So they bought this property and the public library space beside it put $1 billion of investment into redeveloping this into an mobility innovation hub, basically. So they're building at the moment. You can see pictures of us visiting, and it's a beautiful building. It needs a huge amount of work, but that's going to open up a whole space in terms of mobility that's changed previously very derelict, and the whole area around that is significant problems. So coming back to ITS and the World Congress in LA, and you might remember from Arnie, the governor of LA, before when he was in Total Recall, those of you that like the old movies. Johnny Cab has been an automated cab, basically, and automation. It's interesting to see, why I'm putting this up, is that I think over the years of going to many ITS World Congresses, the conversation, I think, has matured around automation. So there is less hype about it's going to solve all of our problems, but there's now a lot of testing and a lot of development. We're still a long way, as Mike was saying, to getting anywhere near towards full automation. But the stages towards that, we're getting a lot of learnings and a lot of development that we're actually working towards. And I think that's really positive that the conversations have matured from selling a vision that's not really feasible at the moment, and that transition period that we get to there, that we can still do a lot and we can still learn a lot and we can still develop and actually use those to improve things. So coming back to some quick snapshots to finish off in terms of the LA World Congress. We travelled from basically New York through to Purdue and Indiana and to Michigan and then across to LA, so went from east to west. Very, very different stages of conversations around decarbonising transport in the US, depending on what state you're in. So California leading the world in terms of some of the things they're wanting to do, to encouraging, incentivising electrification, but huge differences between those that have and that don't, those that haven't. And Lee talked about some of the real deprived areas, and it's really sad to see in downtown LA. Actually, I was expecting it, but I was shocked both in Detroit and LA, about the homelessness and the real issues that they have, that they're trying to deal with, but it's not easy. And there's a lot of drugs and some real issues to be able to work through. So mobility and access for everybody is really important with that. So some great panel discussions. I'm giving the 1 minute signal, so I'll pass through a bit quicker. You'll see here the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between ITS New Zealand and Korea with Lee and Mike, which was a big pla in terms of the way the Koreans like to do it, very formal sort of signing agreement. Down the bottom was also, I wanted to shout out to ITS Australia and New Zealand joined together and I think sort of ran an all-women panel discussion. So in terms of gender, I think that was a great example for Australia and New Zealand at the World Congress to be able to look at some of the key issues that Lee talked about in terms of diversity, culture and inclusion aspects in those areas. Had visits to the LA DOT in terms of the traffic operations. Interesting that they had their first traffic operations which led the world for the 1984 Olympics in LA, and that sort of generated basically their traffic operations for that, and so they've just built a new one and they're moving into it in the next few months, and so it was a good visit to be able to see some of the interesting things they're doing, but that it's also not just about, so you think about LA in terms of the car-centric, the West getting across the US, it's not all just about cars though once you get to, especially to California. There is a huge amount of work going on, even in LA, in terms of providing better cycle and pedestrian. So this was down at Santa Monica, and you can see some repurposing of lanes that were very wide to be able to provide much greater opportunities for pedestrians and cyclists. So some final thoughts from Santa Monica Beach. So I was a great fan of the Lakers in my time in terms of basketball, so it was good to be able to see Magic Johnson just around the corner from the convention centre. But some final sort of thoughts, and I won't go through all of these things, but collaboration and working together I think is absolutely fundamental. There's a real paradox between those that have and those that, in terms of decarbonising electrification at the moment, and I think we need to really understand incentives, aspects for how we can do that better to be able to provide inclusive access to those that need transport as a solution to be able to have the opportunities for social, cultural, economic and environmental as well. There's a Professor Rotman from the Netherlands that struck me with something he said, which was basically when somebody was asking him about how he was successful and what he did, and he said, get good people together and work with them. And I think that is really a fundamental thing that we need to do in terms of making steps forward for New Zealand. The coalition of the willing, I talked a little bit about that yesterday. Resource, really important for strategic partnerships with communities, really important. That's the fourth arm of that, bringing it together. And then making opportunities for people to have skills development, growing through mentoring, people coming through from young ages through to the ages that we need to do. I've been given the signal. I've finished. There you go. We managed to get to 660 as well, so that was good in LA.
Well done.
Okay, thank you.
Over to me. Hey, thank you very much, Beth. Thank you very much for running the panel this morning. Hey, good morning, folks. How good was that, right? Great discussion, some real insights from trends that we're seeing around the world. For Doug for that presentation, for the whole panel, Blair for your facilitation. Folks, one more round of applause, please. Can I say just a big warm welcome to you all as we come back for day 2 of T-Tech 22 as we accelerate to zero. How was your night? How was your networking conversations? Did any of you go out and enjoy Tamaki Makaro's beautiful restaurants? I think some of them are open on a Monday. There were a lot of hands up yesterday. A big part of your objective was to kind of build new friendships, forge relationships. How are we going? Give me a sense of it. Like who's going, yeah, we're crushing it. We're making all sorts of relationships. I'm loving it. Nick's having a blast. Nick's having a blast in the back. How are the rest of you feeling? Yeah, this is pretty awesome. This is pretty good. Not going to play your hype game, Joe, but we're quite enjoying it. Come on. Okay, I'm feeling the room. Who needs a coffee? Right, there's morning tea in like a couple of talks' time. You've got something to look forward to, but far out the content we've got lined up for you is going to stimulate you beyond belief. Hey, yeah, we had a great day yesterday. It's some fascinating content. Today's agenda is equally packed and rich and wonderful. Quick reminder from me just on the housekeeping front, either if you've forgotten or if you joined us today, the wharapaku, the toilets, if you need them, are straight out through the main doors here. They're over on your left, just the far side of the limelight room. Don't mix them up. There is another one if you head down this way, down the corridor, past the Waitakere 3 room and down that little corridor. You can find one there. If an emergency happened today, then we would stay calm. We would follow the instructions of the wonderful event staff here at the Aotea Centre, and they will keep us safe. And remember, folks, we said yesterday we've given ourselves absolute permission to stand up, stretch, walk around, get a glass of water without it being disrespectful to the speaker on the stage. Right? We're grown-ups. We're in day 2 of sitting at round tables in a room without natural light. We're capable of managing our own energy levels. Do what you need to do. Yeah? Hey, yeah, I thought I would check in with you all and ask a question. And I'm going to ask, can everybody please raise your hand? Everybody please raise your hand. Join me in this. Come on, I so appreciate you all. Now, if you are sitting next to someone different than you were yesterday or at a different table, you can take your hands down. All righty. Okay, I mean, some of you are less honest than you'd like me than you are, and but we're not going to name and shame. We're not going to name and shame. No, really lovely work. It's really cool to see that connectivity happening, people weaving together. Voting. You remember we had the opportunity in section 3 yesterday to identify your favourite speaker and vote for them. Votes mean points and points mean prizes. Voting has been extended until 9:30, so we have 25 minutes left to vote for your favourite speaker from that 3rd session yesterday. We've got the link on the screen here, itsnz.org/TTech voting. If you go to the itsnz.org site, there's a button for TTech voting, so you don't have to type the whole thing in with the hyphens going into the little symbol screen and so on. If you haven't voted, will you take 30 seconds now, take your device out, place your vote for your favourite speaker, and then we'll roll on with the content. Let's get those votes in. Let's show those people some appreciation for the effort they put in. So you have my permission to get your device out now. We're going to wait for you. The program's not going anywhere until we see the votes. I'm watching the worm at the back of the room, taking cues to see how many votes are coming in. So I mean, it's the political worm. I'm not saying you are a worm. You're an exceptional human being. Exceptional human being. Don't laugh, he is. No. We'll wait while you vote. See the phones out, I can see people voting, it's wonderful. Hey, I tell you what, in the spirit of keeping momentum up, while you're voting, no need to stop, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our first speaker in today's program. He's waiting, here, ready to go. Matt Ensor is the practice leader, transport advisory at Beca. He's going to talk to us about using AI tools to better understand diverse mobility needs. Matt's a practice leader at Beca. He's been there 27 years. He's focused on how to improve transport equity in communities through the use of both transport and online engagement technologies. He sees a bright future for micromobility, and if you were here last year, won the Best Presentation Award on forecasting mode shift at TTech 21, a coveted and sought-after award. He believes in the future of online engagement and consultation being conversational, not just online forms, and in that spirit, in 2020, founded Frankly AI. You'll remember I talked to you about Frankly a little bit yesterday. They've got the booth out in the Limelight exhibitor space, a technology startup with a mission of no voice left behind. Your votes having been placed, I can see that the team are tallying those as we speak. Will you please put your hands together and give a big warm welcome to Matt Ensor. Thank you all. Cheers. I had one job and I forgot it. Matt, I apologise. Erin will not be impressed if I leave this mic here. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ko Matt Ensor tōku ingoa. Thanks to Lee McKenzie. A fabulous introduction to my talk. Lee talked a lot about this. Big challenge for the profession is understanding the diversity in mobility needs. So my short presentation this morning is really about how some types of AI can help us understand what those mobility needs are. You probably know what artificial intelligence is. Very different to any other revolution we've had before, because this one isn't about physical things. It's about the ability to scale mental applications. Lots of different types of AI. I'm just going to talk about one, and that's natural language processing. So this is the ability for AI to be able to communicate and to understand communication. I don't have time to have a debate. I think this is the most powerful technology in the world. So just let that sink in. I think this is the most powerful technology in the world. So you have the ability to communicate with everyone in the world in a personalised fashion at scale. Very powerful technology. So powerful that this guy, Blake Lemoine, I don't know if you heard about Blake, he was testing Google's latest NLP called Lambda. He decided that it needed to be being treated as a person. He believed it was sentient. And that's simply because it seemed to be able to think for itself. It was so convincing that even the tester believed that it was sentient. So if you've used a chatbot and you think, what a load of rubbish, it was probably designed more than 3 months ago. The technology is moving so quickly that now chatbots soon will be indistinguishable from people. Of course, GPT Lambda, what he's talking about is actually this. This is a parrot who knows statistics. I'm going to do a little bit of a mind game here. I'm going to say a sentence, and I want you to think about what the last word is in that sentence. The cow jumped over the... Yeah, so about 90% of you would have thought of moon, because that seems to be what is based in your brain. Of course, the cow jumped over the fence, the cow jumped over the dog, the cow jumped over the stream are all probably more logical, but statistically, the cow jumped over the moon is what you would expect someone smart to say. And so that's what Lambda does. It just has a lot of statistics and it looks at what the next word should be. That photo I can guarantee you've never seen that before. I Google image searched a parrot that knew statistics, came up with nothing. Hard to believe. So I went to technology called DALL-E and I said, give me a photo of a parrot that knows statistics, and that's what it gave me. I'll talk about DALL-E in a minute. One of the big things about AI, and I've been using this graph for about 3 years now, so we're 3 years closer, is that AI is inherently exponential. So there's lots of things in the world that are linear. We're very used to linear things. We're in that realm of disappointment. We're like, AI, it should be it's pretty dumb. It should be better than this. AI learns exponentially. So it's dumb, amazing. And there's that inflection point there. Not sure when it was. 3 years ago, I said it was in 10 years, so I guess I need to say it's within 7 years. Looking at some of the technology that is not being released because it is so potentially world-changing, I would argue that 7 years is probably a lot closer than we think. The point with this is you can't tell COVID, you can't say COVID, hey, go linear. I don't like this exponential thing, go linear. It's inherent. When we train AI and we tell it to not make that mistake again, it actually stops it making 10 other mistakes that it would have made in the future. And each of those mistakes stops it making 10 other mistakes it would have made in the future. It's inherently exponential. Right, so inclusive design for the range of transport needs. My big point here is that you can't do that with numbers. It has to be qualitative. Here's an example. You might have seen me use this before. I quite like it. I'm a big fan of an e-bike subsidy. Give away some money, perhaps take it away from the EVs and give it to bicycles. I think that the benefit would be greater. That top there, that's a... That policy came up with 25% of people don't want to ride the bicycle, don't use the bicycle, and of those who do ride, 66% of them find it uncomfortable. So that would not be a great outcome. Government would be like, that didn't really work out. Imagine if we knew exactly what different people wanted, and this is really simplified, okay? It might be where you live, the kind of trips you make and those sort of things. You can see with information about what actually every person needs, you could get 100% of people cycling, 100% of people find it comfortable. So the difference here for me is using qualitative information and not quantitative. If you use the average view, you're like, oh yeah, e-bike's pretty good, some won't work, but hey, we'll see how it goes. You end up making these transport decisions that don't have equitable outcomes. one of the things that's growing is an understanding of the cultural importance of different policies and initiatives. So obviously in New Zealand, we have a big range of cultures. Culture is really difficult to describe in numbers. So the fact that that's a power site that had a massacre, 100 or 200 and something years ago, how do you describe that in numbers? Is it a 4 out of 5? Is it 3 out of 5? So really that kind of stuff you need to collect with stories. And finally, this is a true story. We got a survey, culture surveys, got it back in my part of the business. This was during COVID, but people said, we're a bit low on the sense of belonging. And so I sat around in a room, it was a virtual room, of course, with the other managers, and we're like, why is that? Why do people not have why is there a sense of belonging? And of course, that's ridiculous, us trying to second guess why, because there are lots of reasons. What we need to do is actually talk to them, ask them, get rid of that strongly agree, strongly disagree. People love it because it's quantitative, but it's not that useful. So we looked at what the barriers are. This is research I did before I founded Frankly. And digital divide's an interesting one. It kind of exists and it kind of doesn't. So we didn't find that older folk couldn't use devices. We didn't find that, for the most part, people had no internet access. What we did find is that when you use really complex tools, some people can't use them either for reasons of skill or for reasons of connectivity. But everyone can text. So if we use consultation using texting, we really deal to that digital divide. People are sick of online surveys. I thought it would get better over COVID because everyone's moving online. No, it got worse. People are sick of getting 3 surveys a day. It's really easy for you to send them out. The engagement rates are dropping. There's not much, I'd argue, not much great future for that method. Language and culture is another one. We worked with the Samoan community in Auckland. What we found was that online engagement tools are very transactional. I hadn't realised this. They're like, tell me what you think. What should we do? When we talk to the Samoan community, that's not how we do it. Now, you need to be respectful. You can't ask direct questions. I'm not going to criticise the leadership. And so what we found is, language, sure. You might have to translate, but actually you need to reflect the culture of how people in that culture like giving information. Finally, transactional relationships. I used to respond to everything that Auckland Council set out. I thought it was my civic duty. I'd have to say I wasn't treated very well. Sometimes I heard back. Every time I was ignored. So if you have this kind of transactional relationship, don't expect to get much joy. I'll tell you, it's a bit of a tall tale. But my mother sent me an online form just to find out how I was doing this week. She said, please tell me the cool things you've done. Please tell me what's been disappointing this week. And at the bottom was this sort of ominous thing. Said, you return it by Friday. I'm not accepting it after that. So, of course, I rang my mother. And she said, she was trolling me. She said, Matt, this is best practice online engagement. I'm like, no, Matt, Mum, just send me a text. Because that's how people communicate. So that's the basis for Frankly. So what Frankly does is it collects qualitative information. It collects your stories. It collects your views. It asks open questions. It says, hey, Matt, how's transport? What's your aspirations for your family? We kind of collect stories. You can see that, you might not be able to see actually, the bottom right there, it creates personas. NLPAI, it says, oh, you must be a sort of an anxious driver. So you can actually click in there and hear all the stories from the anxious driver. And if you can see that, a line chart, what that's doing is that's tracking a theme. So you might be doing some equity initiatives, Lee, and what you can do is track over time to see how that initiative's going. Because if it's not changing or it's going down, you know that your investment is not working. I'll show this just briefly, just to keep to time. So this is an example. It might even have some sound.
Take a look inside Frankly AI's artificial intelligence engagement tool, Frankly. It's designed to support virtual consultation across a variety of languages and interfaces, enabling the public to view projects and provide feedback in ways that work for them. Underpinned by natural language processing, the conversational AI tool combines experience in engagement and consultation with expertise in AI to deliver an engaging, interactive, and personalised user experience 24/7. It can help to enhance existing engagement tools and methods, and to fill the gap when face-to-face discussions are not possible. When users first enter the site,
I'll just skip just in the interest of time, but what you can see, it's an immersive environment, and frankly is in the bottom right, and it'll pop up and ask you questions, lovely open questions. Imagine if we were in Greece right now. Is anyone here Greek? It's not going to work for you. Right. Imagine we're in Greece right now, we walk into an engagement, all the information's in Greek, but on the right-hand side of the room as you walk in, it goes, "Kia ora, Kiwi, come over here, tell me what you think." That is effectively what Frankly does online. It gives you someone who talks in your language and your culture, no agenda, just wants to know what you think. One of the things that we did is around language. So this is technology that we've developed, the only ones in the world that can do this with an Indigenous language. Obviously we chose Te Reo Māori, and this is a video. What it means is that you can speak in English or Te Reo Māori, or English and Te Reo Māori. Frankly can speak in Te Reo Māori, but the important thing is this is not Googleese. To do Te Reo Māori, you need to be 100% correct. It can't be almost right. And so what we've developed is a tool that means you can engage both in English and Te Reo Māori. And for people who are language learners, it's a great language tool and a revitalisation tool. My personal view is all government-funded agencies should be engaging bilingually. It's the law. But we haven't had technology to do that until now. I'll show you this. So this is, remember Blake Lemoine and Lambda? So we've got OpenAI's GPT-3 here. You might not be able to read that. I'll read it out for you. One of the ways we train Frankly is we get it to talk to another AI. So this is a conversation between Frankly on the left and OpenAI. And so what we do is we run this hundreds of times, and you can tell OpenAI, you can say, act like an obnoxious pensioner, and it will act like an obnoxious pensioner. This is... I can't actually read. Is this Sarah? Sarah from Seattle? Yeah. So Frankly's asking lots of questions here, and you can see Sarah's quite eloquent in coming back. But you can see Frankly's trying and trying and trying, and Sarah just won't give anything. It asks different ways. It's really trying to find something concrete to talk about. I need better glasses. Oh, yeah. And so it gives up, actually. It says, "Oh, try another tack." So I'll ask you about yourself. Oh, thank you. People typically love talking about themselves. So Sarah's lying through her teeth here. She says she's female, 33 years old. And so we come back. This isn't an online form, is it? This is like a conversation. And so I think she's finally given up public transport. So Frankly's just over the moon about this. And so we'll ask about public transport. Right, so to start winding up, there's some other technologies that we use. Key point analysis. I don't know if you've heard of this. This is... I hope no one from Christchurch City is in the room. I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying that this is best practice. So Te Kaha, great. 30,000 people responded, 77 people in support. I mean, we know that's wrong, right? Some of them support it because of this. Why are they supporting it? It's 77%. It kind of means nothing. So what key point, and what I would say is you're using AI, it takes away the effort. So no difference between 30,000 and 3,000 or 3 people. We could have asked everyone in New Zealand this question. AI wouldn't have batted an eyelid. Why does consultation close? Key point analysis, what you do is you put all the data in, and what it works is it works through and works out themes, and then groups them in themes. And so you can see, I can't remember how many this has, about 20 themes, and then you can look at the individual themes that pop out. So we could ask the whole of Christchurch about the stadium, run through, give me 10 minutes to process it all, the 30,000 responses, and find out the top 30 themes and actually write down to what people thought. We can do that now. Finally, DALL-E. You saw me talk a little bit about DALL-E. I love DALL-E. This is a toy, right? I want to say about to release. Google has this technology called Parti, which is just mind-blowing. I honestly think they're not releasing it because it will just fundamentally change economies. What DALL-E does is it's a toy version, and you can create images. Remember that parrot with a parrot that knows statistics? This is Short Street, just up the road. I chose it because I think it is the ugliest street in Auckland. Hard to tell. So what I did is I said to DALL-E, okay, can you make the road gravel with some weeds and flowers? And about 15 seconds later, it gave me that. So, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of post-it notes, write lively and plants, and you stick them on the wall, and actually what we can do is we can get a whole room, and if I had longer we would do this right now, we get a whole room of how people would like to see Short Street changed. I call it democratising urban design. So it used to be you had to be an urban designer to be able to draw cool pictures. I'm going to put a bus lane in here. Not a bus lane, a cycle lane, sorry. And I'm not particularly happy with the cycle lane because it's not very wide and they didn't take the poles out. But what I would like DALL-E to do is to turn this traffic lane into a cycle lane painted in the colours of the rainbow. Now, I know you want to get rid of the Hobson Street overbridge, but I thought I'd avoid that for the moment. So I just said, turn this traffic lane into a cycle lane painted in the colours of the rainbow. Boom. Now, if I was in a room with 5-year-olds, they'd be like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I'd say, well, try some other stuff. So this is here right now. This has been around for a while. And as I say, the technology that's coming will mean that it's absolutely photorealistic to the millimetre, and you'll be able to, walk through it and all kinds of stuff with Parti. So, in summarising, so this is the challenge, and I hope no one in here disagrees that this is not the challenge. So the AI I've shown you today is of today. Imagine what it will do next year, and imagine what happens when this technology is in the hands of citizens. Blake Lemoine's not right, of course. It's not sentient. And the good news is there's lots of lovely tools, but we still have to have folk like us with judgment and experience. I'm very strong on this. You cannot pretend to be dealing with equity if you're stuck in quantitative information. Someone was talking about light rail yesterday and said, what's the story? I haven't heard that question, right? What's the story? Actually, there's probably about 30,000 stories around light rail. Talk to the people who are on the corridor, talk to the retailers, and collect those thoughts and present it. You could do that in a day. Imagine the power of having 30,000 stories. So finally, the future of online engagement is not online forms, it's conversational. Don't send an online form to your family. Do it how people normally communicate. Use it through conversation. So tēnā koutou. That's my presentation. We are out on the stand there, but you can always have a look at our website. We're kind of a young startup, so really appreciate the support of the community. And me korero tātou. Ai rā. Thank you.
Matt, thank you so much. Look, we spend some time in the education space working with natural language processing. I so agree with you in terms of its power to connect on an individual level. Really cool technology. As for the link between qualitative data and equity, and actually just qualitative data and things that are interesting, completely agree. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. Folks, it is time for one of our wonderful international keynote speeches. Michael, it's great to have you with us. I'm going to read the bio, be wherever you're comfortable while I share your background with the team. Professor Michael Milford joins us today. He works in research at the boundary between robotics, neuroscience, and computer vision. He is a multi-award-winning educational entrepreneur, and he's here today to share some of his thinking. His research models the neural mechanisms in the brain underlying tasks like navigation and perception to develop new technologies in challenging application domains such as all-weather, anytime positioning for autonomous vehicles. He has led or co-led projects collaborating with leading global organizations including Amazon, Google, Intel, Ford, NASA, Harvard, Oxford, MIT. I'm sure that list goes on. I mean, if you can't get a client base, they'll do, won't they? They'll do. Also passionate about engaging and educating all sectors of society around new opportunities and impacts from tech, including robotics, autonomous vehicles, and artificial intelligence. Professor Milford's educational company, Math Thrills, creates and hijacks movie and book entertainment to create engaging STEM-based educational resources with customers in 35 countries. He has received more international awards than I can read out without eating into his time on stage, including a Microsoft Research Faculty Fellowship. He joins us today to share his thoughts around autonomous vehicles and robotics. Thank you for being here. Put your hands together, folks. Welcome, Professor Michael Milford.
All right, thank you so much for the invitation, Mike. And I can't see, Mike, where are you? There you are. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. It's been great to meet a bunch of new colleagues and also catch up with other colleagues, some of whom I haven't seen for many years in person. So today, what I'd like to do in my brief time with you is introduce the Robotics Centre that I come from and some of the activities we do in the mobility and transport space, especially in the area of autonomous vehicles. But what I really want to do is spend the majority of the talk giving you an up-to-date, hopefully objective, hopefully doesn't trigger too many people in the audience, snapshot of where we're at or where we're not at in that hyped-up field of autonomous vehicles. I want to recap, I guess, 3 of the key technical challenges that have shaped this field since its inception and are still shaping this field. I want to talk about the current state of play because, as has been alluded to in some of the previous talks, there has been a lot of changes in this field. And it's tempting, I guess, to think the field may be perhaps completely dead. Hopefully I can give you an objective take on what is actually happening and equip you with some key concepts and toolkits for how you can think about and navigate and predict what may happen with this technology moving into the future. So I come from a centre in Brisbane called the QUT Centre for Robotics. We're a large robotics research centre. If it is a robot that flies through the skies, swims in our oceans, whether on the surface or underneath on the Great Barrier Reef, if it's a robot that operates in a mine, in a farm, in defence, if it's a robot that operates in a surgical context or picks fruit on a farm, we have projects in those areas, and we're fortunate to work with many of the top companies and universities around the world, as you saw in the introduction. We do fundamental research and we also do highly applied research. I'll show you a 1-minute video that just snapshots, I guess, one of the key things. You've heard a lot about positioning technology. It underpins many of the projects that you've seen presented so far. And this is just a 1-minute video showing some of the work that we're leading at a strategic sovereign level in this area. Can we crank the volume a bit? Yeah, there we go. So I guess that echoes the theme that it's not just about developing the tech has to be fit for purpose, it has to actually integrate into society, it has to help with equity and accessibility, otherwise the tech is not worth doing at all. In the autonomous vehicles space, we do a lot of work. Ford was mentioned earlier, so we're fortunate to work with Ford in the autonomous vehicle space. We work a lot in the off-road autonomous vehicle space in areas like defence, in mining, working with large OEMs like Caterpillar to improve the technology that navigates their autonomous vehicles, that dig up all the stuff that makes modern society function. We work with governments both internationally and locally. The next speaker from Transport and Mainroads in Queensland, we've been fortunate to have a very long-term relationship working on assessing the potential impacts and interactions of technologies like autonomous vehicles on Australian roads, with a special focus on rural areas, which has been highlighted, I think, in Mike's and other talks, which is very important. We work in the autonomous vehicle space in the defence and security area. I'm fortunate to be a judge, a long-term judge for one of the Dubai World Congress ongoing challenges. This year has a different theme. In the previous years, it's been autonomous vehicles and autonomous delivery vehicles. And we do a lot of outreach and engagement and policy input in the autonomous vehicle space all around the world, as well as locally in Australia. We do a lot of outreach trying to start with kids as young as 2, 3 or 4 years old. We have books, a whole range of books, including autonomous vehicles. I brought along a bunch of copies, so if you have kids, grandkids, just grab one of these off me. They're also good for CEOs as well, if you want to give them. And we very much enjoy educating people about these new technologies. We're also fortunate to get very deep behind the scenes access to most of the top international companies and players in this space, partly through our connections, partly through the fact that they poach all of our staff and students, and so they're kind enough to let us visit them. And I've been writing in autonomous vehicles since 2012, when I was fortunate to go in one of the original Google Priuses, which is an autonomous vehicle, and I've got to see the technology develop over time, over those last 10 years. So to recap the history, autonomous vehicles have been a concept for over 100 years, including at World Expos. Modern autonomous vehicles have been in development for about 40 years. We've had large trucks that could move very slowly since the 80s on this little road. We've had cars that could drive pretty well, not perfectly on highways, for 30 years now. So this is not new technology, but you can really argue that the modern birth of autonomous vehicle technology happened about 15 years ago when DARPA, the big defense agency, ran a bunch of challenges in 2004, 2005, and 2007, where autonomous vehicles had to drive autonomously, or mostly autonomously, about 200 kilometers across the desert in America. In 2004, none of the vehicles made it. In 2005, 5 or 6 of the vehicles made it. And in 2007, there was an urban challenge. And that really gave birth to the modern advent of autonomous vehicles. And the numbers that you hear bandied around are of up to $100 billion of direct and indirect investment in developing this technology. So we know an autonomous vehicle, this is a relatively modern autonomous vehicle. I took this photo on a public road, so I wasn't violating the NDA at the time, although Google was just behind me. I'd just been in one of these vehicles. It has sensors, it has onboard AI, and you've heard about AI in the previous talk and other talks. The joke that was true, painfully true, was how do you tell the difference between an autonomous vehicle and a normal vehicle? A normal vehicle typically has one driver, an autonomous vehicle has 2 drivers because you need a safety driver supervising it. That's perhaps an unfair characterization, but it was true until relatively recently. And the whole big deal about these have been the potential financial and health impacts, plus hundreds of secondary and tertiary on-flow effects. It's important to realize, though, that these have been commercially deployed in off-road environments for decades now. It's the on-road environment that is posing a challenge for everyone in this space. I haven't even mentioned the levels of autonomy because it's probably not a useful distraction at this stage, but people talk about levels of autonomy of these vehicles. So why are people interested? For a while there was a period of about 2 or 3 years where if you had a hot new field, the magical figure you had to speculate for the market size was $7 trillion. It was not $6 trillion, it was not $8 trillion. There was a number of $7 trillion predictions, so money and economics was a big driver, and safety implications. And so these have always been the primary drivers for this field, depending on which stakeholder you are. Of course, it's never that simple. Lots of blowback on this. For example, the fact that the areas that make most economic sense to deploy these vehicles are the areas that have the lowest per capita road toll. We have the representative here, right? Yes. And so the picture is never that simple, right? So you have to believe, treat everything with a pinch of salt. And we've modeled all of these things that the health outcomes may actually be worse. Autonomous vehicles could actually kill more people if people stop walking and using active transport, and heart disease goes up and other things like that. You could have this dystopian society where money buys everything, so you pay extra money to get the priority traffic access and everyone else gets screwed. And if the autonomous vehicles aren't fully autonomous, things like equity of access and equity of transport access could actually get worse. There's a utopian future. We save 1 million lives a year and many millions of injuries. We have a refactoring of what the layout of a city actually means. We have a massive reduction in cars on the road if people stop owning cars, and you can do cool things like sleep during your commute. So we've had these scenarios modeled out many times. And the 3 technical challenges, which are probably not the most significant challenges anymore, are corner cases. These are those events that have never happened before in the history of humanity and probably will never happen before, but your autonomous vehicles need to be able to deal with these systems safely and intelligently. And training a machine to deal with corner cases has been and remains a pathological problem, whether you're working in autonomous vehicles or any type of AI or automation. This is an incredibly difficult problem. The second problem is human interaction. We humans are unpredictable. We like to look at our phones and stand at the edges of roadways. Dealing with and working around squishy, unpredictable humans with a vehicle is incredibly difficult. And we've learnt many key things along the way. The fact that it's not just enough to recognize a human near a road, because if you reacted to all of them, the car would never move anywhere. You need to be able to predict, and you need to be able to anticipate what people are likely going to do. And this is an incredibly difficult, still not fully solved problem. We do it imperfectly, but we do it very well. We know that person looking at their phone is probably not going to step out in front of the car. Training a machine to do that is incredibly difficult. It's one of the key challenges in AI today. And the third challenge is trust, verification, forensic auditability of these systems. Modern AI systems, some of them were presented in the last talk, get a lot of their power from the fact that they're incredibly complex, which means that they're very hard to understand and they're very hard to characterize. This is an example in the navigation domain that I always use. This is the most technical slide I'll talk about today. Imagine you're equipping your autonomous vehicle fleet with a positioning system that helps it navigate around safely. You got 2 choices. The first system works 99.9% of the time, those are pretty good numbers, right? But it doesn't know when it's struggling. System 2, your second choice, only works 99% of the time, so it doesn't work 10 times as often as the first system, but when it's not working, 99% of that time, it is aware that it's in trouble and it can flag that it needs help or it can do some sort of safety operation. System 2, for anything that's operationally or safety critical, is far superior, even though the numbers that most people use to evaluate performance of these technologies would suggest that you use System 1. And the level of thinking in this area is still relatively immature. We do a lot of work in verification and integrity around the area of autonomous vehicles. This is a mature field in aerospace, in transport and mobility. It's still in rapid development. So where are we at? What is the current state of play? So you would have heard there have been some pretty high-profile incidents. There was a Tesla fatality in 2016, which probably go down in history as sort of one of the first high-profile fatalities involving an autonomous or somewhat autonomous vehicle. It's also important to present some balance here. So there are semi-automated vehicles, millions of them around the world, which are on a daily basis preventing minor and sometimes major accidents. So there are both good and bad outcomes already. There are trials going on, not widespread throughout the world. If I go on holidays with my family, my wife likes to avoid places like California because if we go to San Francisco, I will spend all my time spotting autonomous vehicles instead of actually enjoying the holiday because there are so many there. So in San Francisco, companies like Cruise, Waymo, Phoenix, and in areas like China, there are extensive autonomous vehicle trials going on. It is possible, despite all the commentary, we will have good enough statistics on the viability of these systems from a technical perspective in the next few years. There's lots of on-flow effects. So these companies, I said that $100 billion sort of speculative investment figure directly and indirectly in autonomous vehicles. There is a lot of hemorrhaging of money going on in this field. So no one is earning, or very few people, apart from individuals who get nice bonuses, and I'll talk about that in a second, no one is really earning any money, and most people are hemorrhaging very, very large amounts of money. You saw last week Ford's decision to get out of core autonomous vehicle in terms of its startup that it invested in Argo.ai, and this has been going on a lot. All the AI companies, a lot of them have been posting large losses. There's a lot of commentary as we reach peak hype around technologies like autonomous vehicles. And there's a lot of collateral damage in terms of how these companies are trying to make money in the meantime, which is not good. There's been a massive consolidation of key players. So there was a period of peak hype probably around 2016, 2015, where literally if you came from a name brand university in the States and you wanted to do autonomous vehicles, you could just walk out the door and get a $10 million seed investment. And that was literally happening on a week-by-week basis at one point. Those days have thankfully passed, because that's not healthy for anyone to have that surreal environment. And there's been a lot of consolidation. So really there's only, at least in America and Europe, there's only about 4 credible players. Aurora is also under scrutiny in the media based on some memos that were leaked, but you have Tesla, you have Waymo, and you have players like Cruise. But there are no longer hundreds of little companies playing in this space. Economies of scale apply here, and these companies have to have large enough war chests to fund this activity in the long haul if they really want to give it a crack. And that's basically trimmed the flock, so to speak. And the companies have been buying each other. So a lot of the small companies have been acquired. And you see these acquisitions where a company gets acquired for $1 or $2 billion, and it sounds like a good outcome. A lot of those acquisitions are mercy killings. They are not good financial outcomes for the investors. They did not get a sufficient return on investment compared on what they could have done with other investment options. So even though the numbers look big, like $1 or $2 billion in some cases, they are not healthy signs for that particular company and perhaps for the industry as a whole. One of the other things you should also be careful of is you'll hear all this commentary. Whenever one of these big companies folds, you'll hear all this commentary about what they did wrong and what they could have fixed to have avoided that problem. Most of the commentary in the media is relatively superficial at best, and it pays to be very critical of what you read in the popular news. Probably the most useful indicator of what's really happening is behind the scenes talent flow. So you usually get a heads up 3-6 months ahead of time, because there's a mass exodus of people that isn't public, isn't in the public domain, but suddenly a whole lot of people are looking for new jobs or switching industries. And for the last 2 or 3 years, there's generally been a mass exodus of top talent out of the autonomous vehicle space into related areas like AI, robotics, big tech, data science, and so on. I always like to include this slide just so people remember how surreal it was. So there was a big court proceeding with one particular individual. This is an engineer who was 4 years younger than I am now, so he was in his 30s. And in the court proceedings, it was revealed that the bonus for this individual that was being discussed was $157 million Australian. This isn't a company bonus, this is an individual bonus. And according to the proceedings, they turned down that bonus and took $250 million of stock in another company. What is the New Zealand transport budget, roughly? So just to give you an idea, like, none of this is particularly healthy. It creates the most perverse incentives. It creates a surreal landscape where nothing rational ever happens, but it has cooled down. And this is for sure going to be made into a Netflix movie, because it ended with a presidential pardon in Trump's last days in office in the States. So the story is absolutely incredible and worth reading up on if you have some time. So what's happening with the talent flow? I said it's very predictive of what is happening behind the scenes. And so a lot of the talent is coming back to places like Australia, and I think from what I've heard also to places like New Zealand. In the 20 years I've been active in this field, we have never seen so much top-tier world-class talent return from places like the States, from places like Europe. At the moment, I would argue that due to immature ecosystems, we are somewhat squandering the potential of that talent. We have a golden opportunity to do some amazing things with that talent, but we're not fully set up to really take advantage of it at this stage. People are still investing money at scale in this area, but the level of investment has gone down and the level of due diligence has gone up, which is a good thing. We've also learnt a lot along the way. So autonomous vehicles has been very useful as a sort of flagship example of how to sort of navigate these potentially transformative but not yet here technologies. So we've been taught, and this would apply to me just so it doesn't sound like I'm being a hypocrite, that like world-class experts can and are regularly spectacularly wrong about predicting the development cycles, timelines of new technologies. They're not maliciously being wrong, it's just that these technologies are so complex and there's so many, not just technological components, but societal and economic components, that predicting their actual deployment schedule is pathologically difficult. We've also learnt that things like intuition do not serve us well. So there are lots of intuitive narratives that come out in the popular media, like an autonomous vehicle that didn't have range sensors, like a LiDAR or long-range radar sensors. If it had had those, it would have stopped an accident that happened. That is not necessarily correct, because you've got to remember these vehicles are already, say, 99.9999% reliable. And so just adding range sensors to a vehicle may actually cause other accidents from it reacting to things it wouldn't have otherwise reacted to. So intuition, and this has happened in the space industry as well, doesn't work very well when systems are already quite reliable and you're trying to solve that remaining 0.001% of reliability issues. So what are people doing? So there's a lot of diversification. This theoretical $7 trillion holy grail of widespread robot taxis carrying everyone, where someone has a monopoly over the entire fleet. Let's say that doesn't happen, or let's say metaphorically it goes off a cliff. What are people trying to do? Well, there's lots of fallback scenarios. People are looking at autonomous shuttles, and there are some representatives here in that space, autonomous delivery vehicles, robo-taxis that perhaps only work in a restricted environment like an airport or a retirement village or community, and off-road. And off-road has been the only area where autonomous vehicles have actually really been commercially deployed and actually earned money in the long term. The key thing to remember is none of these scenarios are anywhere remotely near as lucrative. So a lot of the drivers that have been driving this field, particularly in the last 10 years, disappear because now they become a solid business proposition instead of a theoretical $7 trillion market. And so you'll see substantial behavior change if people fully pivot to these other areas. Doesn't mean they're not viable businesses, but it's a different type of economic situation. One example, and I think there's a talk about this later, is off-road autonomous delivery vehicles. And there's really two types. There's the ones that predominantly operate on footpaths, and if you've been to certain places in the world, especially in America, you will have seen these operating. Occasionally one of these will drive through wet concrete and get stuck, or drive through a police crime scene, which happened a few weeks ago. But they also are working relatively well. And then you have on-road autonomous vehicles. So these are the slightly larger autonomous vehicles that operate on the side of the road. And these would be the two classes of sort of pivot commercially. There's lots of advantages. The vehicles can be slow. As long as your goods are refrigerated or kept hot, it can take 3 or 4 hours to get them to you because the market will tolerate that unless you're ordering takeout food, for example. Passengers will not tolerate a 4-hour robotaxi ride across town. The vehicle always gets sacrificed. If your vehicle is not carrying people, you always write it off. It's very simple. You don't have to worry about that. People inside the vehicle, people outside the vehicle. So it simplifies that. Because you're not carrying passengers, you can do innovative physical designs of your vehicle, which make it substantially safer, even when it does hit people, and they will hit people. And you can have much more viable remote operation models, which is not the case for passenger-carrying robot taxis. But there are still challenges. The two primary ones are to do this safely, especially for the on-road delivery vehicles, you still have to solve most of the problems that a passenger-carrying robot taxi has to solve. So if you're spending all those billions of dollars on R&D, why not go the full model? Why not go for the most lucrative potential model? And then the economic case is very challenging as well. When you're looking at all of these technologies and pivots and how the field will adjust, it's really important to understand this concept of technology crutches. So the technology inevitably outperforms itself in some areas and is a disappointment in certain other areas. And so there's this concept of technology crutches. What can you bring into your business environment to compensate for the shortcomings of the technology? 3 examples of this in the autonomous vehicle space are remote teleoperation. This is viable for a slow robot that operates on the footpath because it might stop, call out for help, and someone can dial in and remote operate it. You can't do that with an autonomous passenger carrying vehicle traveling at 100 kilometers an hour because by the time someone remotes in, whatever the bad thing that was happening has already happened. So the crutches work in some situations, but not other ones. You can engineer the entire environment to suit the automation. In the early days, we spent a lot of time suggesting politely to government that if you had to spend billions of dollars modifying the entire infrastructure of all your cities to suit autonomous vehicles, that might be telling you that perhaps this technology is not ready for game time and it would not be a worthwhile investment. And the other crutch, which is why autonomous vehicles are in mine sites partially, is if you only have trained operators around them, because that makes it much easier to deploy the technology. If you have an autonomous vehicle in a public space, though, you have to deal with distracted, drunken people who are not paying attention, and that is a much more challenging problem. The economics are driving a lot of this field. And it's very hard to displace already highly optimized economic models. So in autonomous delivery, this is a particularly good example. So with an autonomous delivery company, you have a substantial initial investment in the vehicles. The capital cost of the sensors is still very high. We do not have $1 sensors that are fit for purpose yet, despite the promises of the industry. Operating these vehicles in terms of remote operators is not cheap. You still have substantial ongoing costs to run these systems, even if the technology works well. And it's very hard to compete against potentially uneconomic existing models. So in autonomous delivery, you're competing against a human driver who already does a fabulous job, is probably a gig worker, so is not paid very much, and doesn't have any long-term economic commitment. So the economics are very hard to make. If you want to challenge a CEO of any autonomous vehicle company, ask them to summarize in 3 sentences what their core, crisp, concrete economic model is, and most of them will struggle because it's very challenging. But don't say I said to do that. What I think is most interesting, and I think fits to the theme of this conference a lot more, is if we remove all this focus on profit, 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 where are the possibilities for limited deployment of some of these technologies? And we've heard some of these already indirectly. So subsidized public transport, giving people access to transport where there was none in remote or rural areas, and some of our partners back in Australia are already trialling this, and as a subsidized critical component of a larger commercially provided or government provided transport system. Ironically, with the heat dying down somewhat in the commercial space, it's actually a better time to explore these issues now than it was 3 or 4 years ago, because the whole playing field is a little bit more rational. Where do we stand in Australia and New Zealand? We train the world's best talent, we know, because they all get poached by these companies and go overseas. So the proof is in the pudding. We are amazing at training top talent. Our governments are doing a great job. They're not perfect, but they've invested a lot of money in getting ready for these technologies. We have a lot of peripheral expertise in things like driver vigilance systems and sensor development, so not the core autonomy, but the related things. And the regulatory environment is progressing. There's been a lot of work, and I know, even though I'm a tech person, a lot more about regulation than I did 5 years ago. There is very little actual top-tier deployment and testing in Australia and New Zealand, and we're still scratching our heads a little bit about this because we are small markets, but we're relatively affluent, relatively similar cities to many places in America, so we're still sort of working out what's happening there. And the companies don't have a lot of interest in deployment here. And I guess with all of these factors, do we even want to be a fast follower? Do we want to develop core aspects of the technology? This is a slide which may trigger some people in the audience. If we did want to be a fast follower, what missing pieces of the puzzle do we not have? So in terms of the future, this is the last couple of slides. How do we think about this technology? So I don't know, has someone shown the hype curve yet? All right, this is the hype curve. Whenever you see someone, especially a futurist, present a hype curve, you've got to remember that the hype curve implies that the technology eventually reaches some sort of productive, ongoing deployment, which is obviously not true for lots of technologies. So whenever you see it, remember this only applies to some technologies. If you think about a technology like voice recognition on phones, it wasn't very good when it started. It sent your data off to the cloud, it did voice recognition, but that was enough to give you a differentiable product selling point. Then it could process your voice locally on the phone. Still wasn't perfect, still isn't perfect now, but it's still commercially viable. Autonomous vehicles have gone through this. We've had autonomous vehicles in logistics, in ports, and then in mine sites where they're earning money. It's not a novelty, they're actually making the businesses viable, and maybe autonomous delivery vehicles might get there. We still don't know this for certain. The problem with robotaxis is you can't deploy bad, imperfect robot taxis. You can't say, well, we're going to kill 500,000 people this year, but next year it'll be 200,000, and the year after it'll be 100,000. It's just understandably not acceptable. So you have this very high bar, which it should be, to clear before you can really deploy the technology. And most of the crutches that I talked about don't apply. And this is the quandary with passenger carrying robot taxis. And we still don't know how big this gap is, how much work needs to be done, and whether we can bridge it technologically. So I hope that was a good provocation and perhaps leading into some discussions at the morning break after Nicholas's talk. But thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.
Michael, thank you. Brilliant presentation, and I have no doubt that we're going to have questions from the floor. Are you up for a few?
Yeah, I'm up for a few, yeah.
Some out here. Who's got a question?
I will be as frank as I can in answering it. That's
We
what
appreciate it, Frank. Thomas, I know there'll be some shared crossover having listened to you yesterday.
You mentioned about there's a lack of testing around Australia and New Zealand to enable autonomous vehicles. What are some of the strategies or conversations that we should or could do to sort of level up our game on that?
So I don't know what other conversations people have been having, but I can tell you what our conversations with top automotive players has been. We've been in the room with CEOs and CTOs of some of these companies over the years, and it's basically been, oh yeah, we like Australia, it's a good place to be, but it's just not considered as an alternative. And it's particularly perplexing because other technologies like drone delivery are being tested extensively in places like Australia and New Zealand. And so there's something specific about autonomous vehicles. I always make the joke, every time I go to Sydney, I look at the ridiculous prices I pay for a cab ride. And I always joke, if you're going to do a viable business model with autonomous vehicles anywhere, you do it in a place like Sydney because the revenue you're getting from ride sharing is so much higher than it is in other cities. But to be honest, I don't know the answer to it. It's not for a lack of trying. And I know that other countries who've been willing to throw a lot of money at this problem have also struggled to attract people to do test and deployment as well. Obviously, there are small trials happening. I'm talking about widespread trials of hundreds or thousands of vehicles. That's the sort of thing we're missing.
We've got a question over here now.
Michael, in Lake Nona, or Orlando, I saw a bunch of autonomous shuttles running their public transport service at 12 mile an hour along their public streets, no driver anywhere. They were annoying all the other car drivers who wanted to go quicker, but I was told that the 12 mile an hour rule is testing ground after they've done certain number of 1,000 hours service. They go up to 18 mile an hour, where they're offering a real service at that stage. You didn't talk much about the autonomous shuttles. I see that's a much more likely way forward.
Yeah, so that was in my obviously the limits of a short presentation, that was in my pivot slide. So autonomous shuttles are viable at lower speeds. The economic case for carrying a number of passengers in a shuttle is much better in certain cases, and it can be a subsidised service to fill a certain gap in the transport system. I think that's one of the promising areas. The main challenge there is that the levels of profit and revenue are going to be much more grounded, I think, and so it will just, there's nothing wrong with this, but it won't be that exciting, flashy area of robot taxis. It'll just be a grounded part of your transport solution.
Perfect. Any other questions that we'd like to put to Michael before we let him go? One here, wonderful. Questions make conferences, people. Questions make conferences. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Given the small scale of the New Zealand economy, you could just about buy our economy for some of those sums of money. What role do you see for government in this? Should we keep out of it entirely? Do we promote? Do we test? Do we invest heavily?
So I think that's a longer discussion that should happen over morning tea. I will say one thing that's been amazingly inspiring for me. So I've done a lot of outreach and engagement in the autonomous vehicle space for especially the last sort of 6 or 7 years. Back in 2015, I would go on a panel with a senior bureaucrat or a minister, and I would be cringing every 30 seconds. It was horrific. Nowadays, through the efforts of a lot of amazing people, I'll go on a panel and I don't have to say anything. It's beautiful because I can see a minister or a senior representative or stakeholder talk in detail about the technology, what the limitations are, not just the sort of talking points you hear in the news, but the second and third level nuances and subtleties and on-flow effects. And I think the beauty of that is when the technologies, if the technologies get widely deployed, we'll have much more informed key stakeholders making decisions in a much more informed way, not getting screwed over by big multinational companies. And I found that, as part of the reason I keep doing this, I found that incredibly inspirational. And it's all happened in probably the last 6 or 7 years. So I think deep, intuitive understanding of the technology and the economics and societal impact, I think that's the number one ingredient, and I'm being very impressed by how far that's progressed.
Fantastic. Last opportunity, folks. One more question. There being none, Mike, thank you so much for a really informative presentation. I have no doubt at all they're going to want to talk to you over morning tea.
And come grab a book off me if you want.
I would love a copy. And I would love to have a chat about educational outreach in the STEM space. We connected yesterday. Thanks for a great talk. Cheers. Folks, we're going to have, taking us through to morning tea, a presentation where we'll have the chance to hear more about CAVI. Nicholas Brook is the Principal Engineer at Queensland Department of Transport and Mainroads. He's also the Principal Engineer for CAVI, the Cooperative and Automated Vehicle Initiative in Queensland. He's a Chartered Civil Engineer and an MBA with a passion for solving real-world issues with technology. An extensive traffic engineering background across road construction, design, contract management, traffic modelling, managed motorways, signal optimisations, network operations planning, and most recently in Cooperative ITS. He wants to contribute to improving road safety and efficiency and sustainability for all road users now and into the future. Let's find out more about the CAVI project. Let's give a big, warm TTEC welcome to Nicholas Brook, Lead Engineer at CAVI.
Thanks, Joe. And next time I'll make my bio shorter for you to save some breath.
You deserve bigging up.
I've been introduced, but I'd like to thank TTEC, ITS New Zealand and New Zealand Transport Authority for inviting me over. I was really grateful to get the invite, a little less grateful when I saw I was following Michael Milford, the guru in the industry, and I sort of went, bugger. But then I saw everyone else's presentations yesterday and went, you know what, it wouldn't have mattered who I went after because everyone's been great so far. So thanks so far, it's been really interesting. You may know me as the person who keeps asking questions, so I am not looking forward to my question session. I feel like a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. I don't know, there's the clicker. Alrighty, so I'll start off. For once, I'm actually not just speaking to a room of Australians who have seen this video 500 times. So other than the Michaels, I'll play this so you get a feeling of what Queensland TMR is about.
Queensland, home to more than 5 million of you. We're connecting you from A to B by more than 33,000 kilometres of state-controlled road, 6,000 kilometres of rail track, and 130 million public transport trips each year. Our job, no, our passion, is to deliver a network that is accessible to everyone at every age or stage. We're investing more than $5 billion to improve our transport infrastructure, making your roads more flood resilient and bringing new ways to pay, so you can use our network your way. We're making your health and safety our top priority. We're always listening to you, creating more online services than ever, serving customers online over 11 million times each year. We've kept the state moving, transporting more than 1 billion tonnes of freight, adding 27 kilometres of new cycling infrastructure, and building 9 new boat ramps, pontoons and jetties. We're investing more than $1 billion to maintain and improve our network operations. We're recycling over 1 million tyres and using them to build our roads. We're switching more than 35,000 streetlights to smart LED technology. We're creating a transport system that's environmentally friendly and socially sustainable. Investing in skills, creating jobs, and embracing new technology. Queensland, we're here for you, to connect you to family and friends, schools, work and hospitals, to create a single, integrated transport network accessible to everyone.
So I kept this slide in there. I know that I'm not in Australia, but I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and elders where we did the work where I live, but also the Maori peoples of New Zealand for allowing us to speak and learn here today. As I was looking up how to introduce this slide, I was sort of considering, and I looked through the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles, and I was sort of reflecting on how I wanted to structure this presentation. And I really like the three principles, the partnerships, protection and participation, and it actually aligned really closely with the three sort of key themes I wanted to run through my presentation with. So whilst all the slides were created weeks ago and are about the what we've done, after hearing the presentations what everyone's building to here, I'm trying to link those three themes, which I think to me are the three themes I've seen through the presentation so far, in about the what's as well. So initially, why? Why are we doing this? We did CAVI because we built it out of the want to get to that zero vision. So that was focused on safety. But as time's progressed, you can see now through this presentation versus probably 2 or 3 years ago, that it's now including zero in terms of the sustainability goals as well. So I think that's critically important. It's something I heard yesterday, the Mokapura for our grandchildren. I've got a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm hoping by the time they're hitting the road that they're not going through the same stress as my parents would have been going through whilst teaching me to drive, and feeling a lot safer about what they're doing on the road, or ideally have other options rather than having to drive everywhere. Next, the participation, so trialling things, making sure you're actually going about it. So it's about not fearing the failure of trying. That's the whole point of trials and pilots, is that you need to try. And I guess something we were told right at the start of our pilots back in 2016, 2017 was, you're on the bleeding edge of this, be ready to bleed. And we did bleed. We worked really hard through it. We failed a lot. But part of that, and this isn't something we usually get the opportunity to do in public service, is we were supported from the highest level, from our Director General Neil, all the way through our Chief Engineer Dennis Walsh and Miranda, is building that psychological safety for the team, where we knew that if we did fail, we'd just be honest about it, we'd be transparent, and we'd be clear about what happened and learn from it. So really, the only failure is the failure to learn. So we learnt from what we did, we built on it, and we got better. So we thought that was a critical thing to let you know as you progress into this space. And then finally is the collaboration. So Australia and New Zealand, we're both large islands, but as the saying goes, no man is an island, or no person, team or organisation is an island. Don't do it on your own. It's about the collaboration with government, industry, academia, and that's what made our pilot work and tick along. So the why. So leaning into the why, technology is coming, but we didn't do this project because technology is coming. We don't do technology for technology's sake. We did it to save lives, and that's why we set these key objectives. So we said we want to validate the safety benefits. Is this technology actually going to lead to a point where we can get some tangible safety benefits from it? We wanted to demonstrate the technology to the public. We want to bring them along in that journey so that they're not going, oh, what's happening here? We want to have them as participants in the pilot so they get to feel it and see it as we do. We want to grow the department's organisational readiness. Michael touched on it a lot, the talent, and the talent is what makes this whole industry flow. And we think that if we're going to be providing as government key foundations to this connected and automated vehicle space, we need the talent to be able to support that. We can't just keep using the same old philosophies of training civil engineers who build out the black roads and tarmacs and then fill potholes, which is my background, but I've transitioned as the organisation will. And then encouraging the partnerships and building that capability across industry. So the Ipswich Connected Vehicle Pilot, that's sort of been our marquee piece Lots of millions of dollars, about 3 years of planning and a year of piloting went into this. COVID got in the middle of it and added an extra half year to a year delay. But I guess, as Michael also touched on, is predicting the timelines for deployment. That's one of the first lessons we learnt from this, is that you can go, yeah, we're going to go up to the minister and say, you've got 2 years and we'll have people in cars and they'll be doing this. Yeah, that's really unrealistic to put those timeline limits on yourself, and you really just jam the team and put a lot of pressure on everybody by making those sort of predictions. The technology, the integration components, they're all so complex that you really want to take the time and get the integration correct and make sure you get the testing right, so that when you do get people in these vehicles, they're getting a good experience. So you can see some of the partners up there. They're just the partners who contributed financially. We also had partners or vendors that we paid to come on board and worked with us. So I think teams like Capsh at the back there, Coda Wireless, Telstra. Yeah, we had probably another 5 or 6 that probably could be on that list. But we really went wide with the industry engagement and getting pretty much anyone who was interested in being involved. And that really was critical for us. At our peak, we had up to 50 staff, and only about 10 of those were TMR. And that's not to say that you need the population of Hamilton to get a pilot up and running. That was a quote from yesterday. I don't actually know how big Hamilton is. But what it does mean is we were only 1/5 of that team, and it shows like how broad we had to go. And in terms of that collaboration, we actually co-located with those people. So some of them were based in Adelaide, some Melbourne. So what we actually did, we said, no, we need everyone in the room. We need to be able to throw pens at each other to get each other's attention, talk things, plug things in, watch it change. So that collaboration, co-location was a critical factor to the success of this pilot. And again, we learnt that from failing. We started off doing remote. We went, this isn't working for us. Everyone in the room, let's work together. And that's a really critical learning, to the point where they were so absorbed in the team that at least 2 of those people have now transitioned to TMR or TMR affiliate businesses like Transmax. So they fell in love with us, we fell in love with them, and they stuck around. So how does CITS work in ICP? This is a bit of the what. So CITS, I'm sure many of you are aware, there's the 2 different standards. There's the standard battle. We said, let's not get involved in that. That's not our piece. Let's align with Europe, because whilst we are an island, we need to be aligned with someone else who actually makes cars and is going to send the cars to us. We don't have the influence in the market to say, hey, Volvo, could you do this type of car for us, or add this feature? Then you go, who are you? Where's Queensland? So what we really go about there is say, when European Commission lands on what their standard is, we'll change, we'll match what they need to. But at least initially we did ITS G5 because that's where Europe were heading at the time. I'll leave the rest of that debate about which type of chipset to use, but it really is just the bottom communications layer that we can switch out if we need to. One thing we did vary from the standards, when we started they hadn't agreed on how they were going to do hybrid comms. So that was, how do you get messages to long range locations? Queensland, huge. Not many, very separate population centres. So we said what we really need, we can't have DSRC stations or roadside stations at every intersection or every 500 metres, it's infeasible. So we said let's use that cellular network that Telstra have and see if we can't do a hybrid comms model over cellular to get different types of messages out to those vehicles. So that worked, and the standards have now ratified and do include that as an option. That's a communications architecture. Another critical component, I skipped one by accident, but it doesn't matter. I'm not really talking directly to the slides. If you hadn't noticed, sorry for any of those who are drifting off and then looking up and going, what's he talking about? But because I'm not actually following the slides directly, I'm piecing it in with the themes. Cybersecurity is critical. I'm not sure if you've heard, but Australia have had a bit of an issue with cybersecurity over, ironically, Cybersecurity Month. One of our 3 major telcos, probably one of our 2 major health insurers, and one of our 3 major electricity companies all had data breaches, losing private data out into the dark wide web, which isn't ideal for us. So thankfully, from the get-go, we'd said cybersecurity is at the forefront. We need to be able to trust the messages that are coming back and forth are from valid stations that are part of the system. We don't want a kid with a laptop sitting there going, lights are green, lights are red, vice versa. It would be a very poor experience for the users, and in the future would basically, if AVs are using this in a CAVI environment, be quite a safety issue. instead. But at the same time, you also need to have that availability. So you can't just go, all right, we're not going to do anything. So part of security is availability. And then the last one is making sure that it's all agreeable to the same standard. So we actually sent one of our staff over to America. They did a full key ceremony where they go into a dark room, turn the keys at the same time, and our SCMS, our security system, that is actually what they do. The security system was online, and that was how they made sure that there was no way that it could be hacked. The root authority is safe. And without going into too much technical detail, that's how then they sign the messages and actually trust each other, because we're the only ones who could give them access to that signature and that certificate. So I think that was a critical one to sit on there just for a moment, just because of how important, prominent it is in Australia right now. So about the actual pilot, we had 350 vehicle stations. So this is the public engagement part. So participating through getting people involved, we went out to the Ipswich people and said, who wants to be part of this pilot? There were some financial incentives to get them on. That's probably a good learning for anyone looking to do pilots, is sometimes you've got to pay to get them involved. Some of the people there were for the love of the information, the technology, wanted to be involved, but we did have to pay a lot, and we still didn't get the 500 we wanted. We outfitted 30 intersections so they could get roadside messages as well as the cellular messages, and those are the use cases, and you can see there how many alerts we got. So roadworks warning, there's a lot of roadworks in Queensland as there are here. So every time they went up, approached the roadworks, if they're going too fast, they'd get a warning that said roadworks ahead. And then if they were still going too fast through the roadwork zone, it would give them alerts to say reduce your speed. So that was actually one of the ones from their feedback, was one of their favourites, because it is something that's different from their usual driving condition. The top one there is one of the intersection warnings. So if they're approaching a red light and they're approaching too fast, the acceleration profile suggests they haven't seen the red light. It'll go from a, hey, there's a red light ahead, all the way to stop, there's a red light, like you're going to run through it. Anecdotal evidence from one of the participants at their closeout interview. They said one night they were driving home fatigued and just completely didn't see the light. That saved them from going through a red light. So not saying it saved their life, there might have been no one else coming, but it does show the importance of these. And we see this connected vehicle atmosphere as being, you're catching the 1%. I trust all of you got here because you're able to drive safely. But there's that 1% of times where you're looking at the next lights that you're focusing on, not the current ones. Or you're going through the roadwork site and you're just blanked. You're like, oh, it's an 80 zone here, and you're just going 80, and a road worker walks out. So that's what we're there for, is that 1% of time when you've just tuned out a little bit and need that extra information. Involving the participants was critical to our success. I'm not a statistician, and there might be some of you out there, and I'm sorry for that. That you're into statistics. That's a sad career, in my view, but important, but critically important. But this is the stats. So they had to work out what was the right number, what was the right population to actually get through this part to get significant results. So that's sort of the breakdowns, and then you do the demographic breakdowns to see if different people react differently. And then the way we ran the pilot was we did 9 months that they had the equipment. 6 months was with the equipment on, 3 months was with it off. So that way we could directly compare one person's performance with it on and off. We also had an unfortunate group that never got it on. So they were the controls, so they basically just drove normally. So we could compare seasonal effects as well. And the good thing was, by doing all that, and the hard work the statistician team did, was that we did find a reduction in speed. I think ISO was a really benefit, so the in-vehicle speed one. So Andrew Wall, I think you mentioned it yesterday, ISO critically important. We got reduced speed across the board, but then we also got great improvements. There's another slide that shows the improvements, but I'll show you. This is actually one of the use cases with one of our test drivers. So you can see the HMI in the middle there. That HMI talks to the blue vehicle station, and the blue vehicle station is talking to either the cloud or the roadside stations, depending on the use case. And he's approaching a roadworks there, and he's still going over the speed limit. You probably can't see roadworks there. There they are. We set all of our own personal equipment that we use for testing at a higher threshold, so he's not actually breaking the law there to get the warning. We just set it at a lower threshold so he can trigger it safely. And the safety evaluation came out and said that, yeah, we actually did. So across the use cases, including 2 that we had to simulate. So a quick background on that is that sometimes whilst you want to do these in real life, they're just not practical to get an outcome. So slow stop vehicle and EBL, or emergency electronic brake light, would have required 2 vehicles that are equipped, so 350 out of the entire population of Ipswich, to be behind each other at the time one of them slammed the brake on. We said the chances of that happening are pretty much a snowball's chance in hell. So what we'll do is we'll simulate those. So thankfully, Cars Q, QT, they've got a big vehicle simulator, so we're actually able to make like an electronic environment and get them to simulate that and see what the safety impact was. So, but across all of those, the ones that were in the real part and the 2 simulated ones, we predicted it was about 12.9 to 20% safety improvement if extrapolated over Queensland. And that's just those use cases. So that is a subset of the ETSI use cases. And that's also just safety focused. I know a big theme of this has been emissions reduction and sustainability. That's a whole other set of use cases that this same technology could enable. However, our funding was pure from a camera detected offence program, which meant that the money had to be spent on safety related projects. So we couldn't dive into those more sustainable use cases. Participant feedback was generally positive, and I think that second one is really quite important, is that 70% said that they would purchase connected systems in cars. So I think that's showing that the customer is ready for it and asking for it. And through our conversations and partnership with companies like Lexus, it seems that the companies want to get it out there. I think some of them are half sitting on the fence waiting for the technology debate to happen, but also waiting for the customer to sort of see a value in it so that they can sell it. But at the end of the day, they've got a commercial output. And I think that what they've mentioned loosely to us is the more that government get involved, trial and have these test beds ready, like AIMS, Daniel and the CAPS team have presented, and I think Nick will present on this afternoon. And what we've got now in the pilot is really critically important to that, because it shows that we're ready as government to support their vehicles in the country. The last thing I'll touch on just there was that one thing I think that we did, one of our learnings when you go through your many trials or pilots you should consider, we did lots of communications. We communicated over 100 papers, over 100 presentations. But one thing I don't think we did well was bring people through the experience. And what really sort of highlighted that to us is when we had ITS Australia Summit back in August, we actually took some VIPs through the area, including Lee and Ian, and they went, well, this is a real thing. This is actually here, and it can feel it and see it. And while we're trying to get other states on board and trying to get like a national approach, I don't think we've done that well. So whilst we can talk about it, until people are tangibly feeling it and experiencing it, they really don't get that true feel that it's real and it's coming. So this next part is about the cooperative and highly automated driving pilot, so the CHAD pilot. My colleague Amit Trivedi ran this, so I'll be a bit higher level on this than I could be on the connected vehicle pilot. So the pilot objectives were to understand where AV technology was going within the industry, but also see what we could do in terms of what do we need to do for infrastructure, what do we need to do for digital assets, how do road users perceive it, and also how do they interact and how does it interact with other people. So a lot of the intense testing was done on our Mount Cotton off-road track, and they include things like having bicycles drive past it, or we would simulate a kangaroo by throwing one of those giant yoga balls to have a weird bouncing sort of pattern to see how it interacted. So things like that. But some of the cool stuff that, no, it's too far forward. Here's some of the cool stuff from my view where we actually get to the connected and automated part. So there's lots of different AV sort of tests going out there, but also this connected atmosphere part, bless you, is where the connected comes into it. So we're able to give it a denim or an awareness message about the roadworks, and then we're able to watch it actually use that message to start changing lanes before it was able to perceive where the roadworks were. So that was pretty cool. And another one using a big, large sight screen, and it was getting the signal information saying there's a pedestrian at this signal. So I was able to slow up, even though it couldn't perceive that pedestrian on its own with its sensors, which are realistic scenarios that might happen. You've got a truck obscuring the intersection, and you want to know there's a pedestrian or a cyclist crossing. It can actually start to change its behaviour based on that. So if we can provide that level of information as government, then it allows the vehicle to do better things. It can take those corners a bit more aggressively because it knows, it goes, oh, they've told me there's nothing here. So it can actually take them in a more realistic way. So now I'll go back. So the work packages that the CHAD pilot had was firstly make sure it got all its permits, consider all the ethical implications, did a handover study, which I was fortunate enough to be called in to be one of the participants of. So they said, just drive this car around and then we're going to put it in automated mode. So they put it in automated mode and they said, now do what you want. So I sat there and watched basketball for 10 minutes and then it goes, take over. And I go, oh. So what they were doing from that was seeing how long it took people to actually react. And I think that report's only just been published. So if you went to the iMove website, you'd be able to find that one. I think it's quite interesting. Some people didn't react at all and the safety driver had to take over. And some people were just like so nervous they're basically always watching it and not willing to let it take over. Then the CITS one I touched on, the automated vehicle dynamic safety study. They also are the public education. So we've done 3 or 4 public demonstrations where we're actually getting the public to sit in the automated vehicle and do loops around a particular area as if it was like a robo-taxi to get that public experience of what it's like in a real-world on-road environment at high speeds, like 50 k's an hour, but higher speeds than what they might have experienced in shuttles and things like that. So I thought that was quite important, and including, I think, Bundaberg, which is like a small town. So getting out to those rural areas, I think, is quite important so that people in that atmosphere can understand what we're doing. This one, I think, is quite important. I think Amit, my colleague, has touched on this a lot recently because there was a report from another research agency saying you've got to start focusing on improving your signs and lines to a quality higher than what humans have, or upkeeping them with new technologies. And he pretty confidently disagrees with that. So much so he's going to start a new project to disprove that. But the general thought there is that it just make it good enough and upkeep it good enough for humans. The machines will catch up. With a software update, they'd be able to do it better than we could repaint all the lines. I'm sure very similar in terms of how much space we've got to cover. Imagine if someone said, go out and repaint all your lines so we can run an AV up and down it. That's a pretty expensive project. And then by the time you've done that, they go, oh no, we just put a software patch in. And you went, oh, that was a bit of a waste of a few $1 million. So that's something to consider there, is that the software can improve quicker than we be able to improve our infrastructure. So whilst there are a few warnings about that, I think you touched on it yesterday, there are certain signs that it's going to be confused by. I think you had a Coca-Cola sign and 17 yellow pointing signs, and you go, yeah, okay, it'll confuse it with things like that. But again, it'll get better, it'll learn, it'll share it back through the cloud. Yeah, so then the next stage is to look at those unique conditions. It's been touched on multiple times this morning. The rural conditions, Australian conditions are quite different to what other international conditions are. So that's what Amit's next project is starting to say, what's the extended domain that Australia have unique to anyone else? That's why kangaroos sort of came up, and how do we interact with those different sorts of animals that move differently to maybe a moose where they're sort of testing. I think they've got moose up there. I'll quickly play this video. This is just some news coverage.
Dreams are made of. Time to write that shopping list. Email or catch up on your favourite show. This is Zoe 2, Australia's most automated vehicle, and she's being tested in Queensland.
They can play with their phones, play video gaming.
Automation is classed from 0 to 5. 1, cruise control. 2, assisted lane control. That's all we have for now. 3 is automated driving in areas like highways. 4 is where Zoe 2 fits in.
If there is a risky situation that will require an emergency response from the vehicle, or give the control back to the driver.
And 5, there's no steering wheel.
It's a utopian vehicle, which is kind of a pod. You can ask the vehicle to go and pick up your kids.
Zoe 2 uses radars, cameras and sensors to predict what's happening ahead. QUT and the Transport Department are adding humans to the mix to see how long it takes to in an emergency situation.
The question all commuters want answered: when will this technology be available in Australia? It's almost impossible to predict. So sit back, relax and enjoy the ride.
Early days in a long journey. Georgie Chumley, 7 News.
Did you get one of those?
Maybe. I haven't decided yet.
Not for me.
I think they left that bit in tactically. So we've done a lot of exciting stuff, and there's more exciting work to come. Our program sort of keeps extending as we come up with new ideas, and what I hope to do is start to include some other road users in the near future. Vulnerable road users, I think, will be my next target. At least initially, motorcycles have very similar in terms of their speeds, and some of their risks are very similar use cases. However, I would like to really start to see some things like the pedestrians and push bikes, bicycles, all the different e-bikes and personal mobility devices. And I think that really leads us to that ecosystem where it can all be connected, which allows the foundation for automated vehicles, if they do track into that, continue on a trajectory of being commercially purchasable. And I think really the things I want to leave you with is that we've done a really big pilot, cost us a lot of money, took us a lot of time, but we learnt a lot from it. So we were willing to try, fail, improve. And if we had succeeded on the very first roll of the dice, we wouldn't be here touting good results, I don't think. I think we would have said, how'd you get there? And we went, a bit of luck. And that's not the answer people want to hear, because everyone can't get as lucky. So we did have to go through a lot of time and effort, a lot of stress, but we got there. And it was, so to give context, so 2016 I joined the team, and the pilot wrapped up at the end of 2021. So it was a large-scale longitudinal pilot. However, we think that other future deployments, like last year alone, we did another 36 roadside stations up the Bruce Highway, and also scaled out our cloud to cover the Bruce and Warrior Highway. So for those who don't know, it's about another 1,600 kilometres up to Cairns, another, I think, 1,200 kilometres out west. So we're starting to cover larger ground by scaling the solution. I actually got the team to scale out the cloud solution to include Auckland, thanks to the data from New Zealand TA, which I think got published, I think Joe was telling me, only a couple of weeks ago. We just happened to must have gone at the same day it got released. So we scaled it to include that. However, when I brought the vehicle station over, found out that the cellular provider, I couldn't just switch like that, unfortunately, without incurring, I think it was $3,000 a day charges from Telstra. So I would have liked to have been able to pull off a demo while we were here for you, but didn't really seem feasible under the budgets. But that's something that I think we could fix out with some configuration. And so one of those things where I mentioned about getting people hands-on experience of it, the next step, we're saying let's get all the states of Australia and hopefully some stations to New Zealand if we can sort out the telco provider. So then we can actually get people trying out these different use cases, at least the cellular ones. Obviously the roadside still needs infrastructure installments, but we think that our cloud solution could scale to provide at least that early touch and feel to country or New Zealand and other states. So why? Let's get to accelerate to zero, save lives, save emissions, and then, make sure you get on the trialling. I think everyone here has agreed that we want to trial, and then partnerships, so work together, because no one's an island, even though we're islands. So, thank you. And I guess questions?
Thank you. Nick has been one of our most sort of thought-provoking question askers of our 2 days together so far. I think it's time we showed him the same respect. Who's got a curly one? Who's got a question for us? Beautiful. Thank you.
I forgot that I was presenting on day 2 and asked way too many questions on day 1.
I was just wondering, how does your experience with Zoe relate back to Michael's presentation with the automated vehicle, and how it doesn't really, it's probably not going to get to the 100% point where it's safe to operate? You're still continuing with the trials, I gather, at this point.
Yeah, I would never go and contradict the guru, being Michael. My experience of having sat in it and feeling it, so it takes off. Everything sort of feels normal. Cornering's a bit jerky, but it's just, I guess, the programming. The fact that Zoe 2 that I showed actually does run on real streets at real speed. So with the streets it was running on were 50k roads. It felt normal. Like I didn't feel like we were in a situation where I went, oh, we're slowing down other traffic or we're confusing other traffic. It participated in the traffic like a real car. And I think that was what Amit and the team who built it out, and I think Michael was there in the early days of that as well, what they were trying to actually achieve was get a vehicle that's not just there for one-off demo. We'd seen multiple shuttles before. Let's get a car that feels like a car, looks like a car, and see how it reacts. So I think what was proven is it's possible. It's definitely possible. But I guess the economic values and whether there's enough, I guess, tailwinds to push that forward is the outstanding thing. In terms of technology, I think it can be done. That's for sure. And I think Michael probably will agree with that too. It's about whether there's economic value in it. Sorry, I hope that helped answer anything. Oh, okay. Well, so when in one of the drives I did, there was a situation where it had to hand over control, but when they looked back at the data, it said it would have stopped safely, but they had set precautions. So basically, that was a weird situation. Someone was pulling out without indicating, just like boom, straight out in front of it, and it went. Rudge. It broke, and then it said take control until this situation had cleared itself.
Nice one. Nick, we've got a couple of questions this side.
A question around how you can apply some of these lessons. Europeans are mandating intelligent speed assist for their vehicle fleet. Have you got results on how much you think that will improve safety, and have you translated that to the Australian context in terms of how quickly will Australia follow that?
Yeah, so in terms of the ISA, it was actually one of the few use cases we didn't self-analyse because there were so many papers already done out of it in Europe, hence they're getting to a point where they're going to mandate it. So I think the research has all shown big safety reductions by just showing people the correct speed in their car at the right time. Some of the, I guess, difficulties we found with that is, as bad as it sounds, coming from a transport agency not knowing where our own speed zones are, not knowing where our assets are, and I'm sure Andrew and anyone who's trying to ingest that data with a bit of trust goes, if it's old, it's a bit useless, it's all right. If it's not live, like variable speed limit zones, how much can you trust it? So it's about getting it really correct and building out that, I guess, digital twin or digital version of the assets, for lack of a better word. So I think we still have a little way to go before we could provide enough information to make that viable, but I think it's critically important, even if it's in no other way connected.
Most people regularly break the road rules on any drive, and when we have connected and autonomous vehicles, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, that data will be starkly available. How is government thinking about sort of amnesties and selectively not fining people when there's like complete data on who is speeding at any one stage?
I guess that's a bit out of my... I wouldn't want to be up here speaking on behalf of TMR and say any policy sort of direction. I'm still trying to get my head around the new PMD rules, let alone understanding how they would assign blame according to road rules and capturing like that. Any of the work I've been looking at with like the vehicle generated data groups, they're all like, yeah, look, let's get some like reciprocal data sharing going, but it's going to be anonymised, aggregated. You're not going to be able to pin anyone for anything because we're not going to give you the info to pin someone for that. Where that then sits on a legal thing, like if the police or federal police impose laws or what is it, where they do the legal request for data, I don't know, but that'll be in that company's rule set. So like what they did with the iPhone in America, where they wanted to get that data and they had to, I think the FBI were after it or something like that. So yes, I think it's at a policy, probably police level, whether they can, get the data, yeah.
We'll do one last question here and then we'll take some tea.
Just wanted to ask about the human interaction aspect of it. You had the center console say what mode you're in. You had chosen blue as the color with some icons and an alert that goes off. Did you do much human interaction research into what decision do you go about making? Sort of what does the alert sound like? What color is best to use? Do you have a voice or not?
Yeah, so I'll separate quickly. So the Ipswich Connected Vehicle part I was part of just had the small HMI that sits on the screen. That we did a fair bit of research, right colours, right icons, right sounds. And we still were getting up and down feedback. Some people hated it, some people loved it, and you just sort of go, oh, I think it's a horses for courses thing, and personalisation will be key, was I think one of the subjective sort of studies findings. For the Zoe, the one with the big screen in the middle, I would have to refer to Amit, and I can take that notice and send him an email now to find out how much they did. I'm pretty sure, so they built that in France with a company called Vedicom, and I'm pretty sure that it would have just been what the stock standard was, and it just was like hands-on, green, press the button, and it takes over. Yeah, sorry. The answer is I don't know, to make it really short, sorry.
I've been persuaded to take one more short question.
Hey, Tom.
Would you consider to do some testing around South Island of New Zealand? Because like we got different landscapes and...
with the connected vehicle stuff or the automated vehicle?
With the AV and the car simulators and those kinds of things.
I think it's very, very, very expensive to a point I'm not allowed to say how much is spent on it, and I don't think that they would like it coming across on a boat. You don't mean physically, you mean just generally, like...
Simulation.
Simulation? Yeah, I'm sure that could be something I could talk to Amit about reaching out, if you like. Yeah.
Put it on a boat. Go on. Folks, big hand for Nicholas Brook.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you. Oh, mind that. Thanks, mate. Well done. Hey, that was outstanding. What a great way to take us into morning tea. Morning tea, of course, served in the Limelight room where we've been throughout the conference. Head there, enjoy some company. Can we come back here for 11 o'clock to kick off our next session? You'll hear the bell chiming, so you don't need to watch your watches too closely. We'll see you then. Enjoy. Thanks, team.
Well, welcome everyone to this session with Dave Ferguson from Nuro. Hope you can you hear me, Dave? Well, welcome. I'm not sure if you can see much of the room. There's about 150 of us here. We've been hearing a lot about automation, AI, equity, and those sorts of things. I first met Dave actually in 2016, and you came out to New Zealand and you just finished up with Google Self-Drive. And I remember asking you, well, what's next? Because I couldn't think of, what could follow on with something like that. And you told me you had a few ideas going on. So this session really is to cover off what Dave's doing now with Nuro. I did a bit of research, Dave, and one of the things you've been called is an accidental entrepreneur. So perhaps you could go through the journey from when you started through to now being the co-founder of Nuro.
Sure. Well, nice to see everyone. I got a pan of the audience, and apologies that I'm a big bloated face on the screen rather than there in person. But nice to spend time with everyone today. Yeah, starting a company was never really one of my bucket list items, to be honest. So I did undergrad at Otago, and while I was there, the department got its first ever robot, which was a little red rubbish bin Dalek style vehicle that we tried very hard not to have run into walls inside driving around. And for me, I just got totally hooked. And this idea of being able to program something and give it the ability to make its own decisions and ideally be somewhat intelligent in going about doing things on its own was just incredibly exciting. And so from there, the professor that I was working with at Otago told me, wow, if you want to do robotics, then you should go to the Robotics Institute at Carnegie Mellon in the US. And so I came over to the US to do a PhD. And Carnegie Mellon was very much like the Disney, and still is very much like the Disneyland of robotics. So Disneyland for robot nerds, and I just loved it. And I got to play with all sorts of robots, land robots, aerial robots, space robots, and so have been in the field ever since. And I worked at Google for about 5 years on the self-driving car project. And it's now Waymo, but before it was its own company. It was about 12 of us when I joined. And so was very excited about self-driving and the impact that it's going to have on communities and quality of life, let alone sort of road safety and infrastructure, which may be more interesting to some of the audience here. And then about 6 years ago, one of my colleagues at Google, who's also a very good friend, and I decided to create Nuro, which is a robotics company. Our original mission was to accelerate the benefits of robotics for everyday life. And so the idea was to create a company that we felt had a really good shot of helping accelerate some of the benefits that robotics are going to provide to society writ large over the next few decades. And so we started Nuro. It's now been 6 years. When we first started it, we weren't sure exactly what initial application we were going to work on. So we spent some time thinking about what made sense. And in the end, we landed on what we've been doing, which is really trying to transform local commerce by having self-driving vehicles that just transport goods. So everything from groceries to restaurant deliveries, packages, parcels, convenience items, and really try to use that technology to long-term transform what our relationship is with local commerce from a sustainability perspective, strengthening local communities, the whole shebang, which I can geek out about ad infinitum. And that's what we've been very busy doing ever since.
So as I understand it, Nuro is an autonomous delivery vehicle that's on road. Can you tell us a little bit more about the technology that's involved in the vehicles?
Yeah, so we're now on our 3rd generation custom vehicle, and I don't know if you have any photos that we can pop up on stage that would be a lot nicer to look at than my face, Matt. But it's very much a custom on-road vehicle that we've designed purely for transporting stuff. And one of the really nice things about that is that it enabled us to start from scratch and rethink almost entirely what vehicle design would be. So it's a fully electric vehicle, but because it doesn't have to transport people, we could reimagine what the form factor of the vehicle should be. It doesn't need, almost all vehicles today, even though if you look at a Tesla versus a Ford Mustang, there are differences in style. They're all quite similar when you break it down into the core fundamentals, which is they tend to have 2 people seated side by side. They're trying to be almost as narrow as possible, given that you have 2 people seated side by side. Some of them have a second row. All of them have all of the crush zones and safety features that you need to transport people very, very quickly. Because we didn't have to put people in it, we could rethink a bunch of that. And in particular, some of the areas that we're most excited about are we could take the last 50-odd years of safety innovation that has been designed really to protect what's inside the vehicle, and we could flip some of that inside out. So while our vehicles don't have airbags or crumple zones to protect the occupants, which in our case are sort of eggs and burritos, we have airbags on the outside of the vehicle, so that in the case where we collide with something else, such as a pedestrian or a cyclist, which we hope doesn't happen, but sometimes people jump out in front of vehicles, we do everything that we can to minimize the impact and the energy that's transferred to those other road users. So one of the taglines that we have from a safety perspective is, we care more about the safety of what's outside the vehicle than what's inside it. And that's been really cool. I think from a sort of technology perspective and an innovation perspective, it's enabled us to do a lot that's quite different from normal vehicle design and normal vehicle tech, which has been a lot of fun.
So your website, I'll get the AV people to bring up your website just so we can get a shot of the vehicle. We actually did see it in a previous presentation, but it'd be good. So is it Nuro.com? Is that correct?
It's Nuro.ai.
Nuro.ai. So perhaps we can...
we have not shelled out for Nuro.com yet.
So can you tell me a bit more? I know when we talked in 2016, you were very strong on, we need to get autonomous vehicles out onto the road so they can learn and make mistakes. But without that, it's just going to be too slow to get the benefits of autonomy. Can you talk a bit about how you're training your Nuro vehicles?
Yeah, so maybe there are two interesting aspects to that question, Matt. So one is sort of fundamentally, and it's almost an ethics question, really, is at what point should we deploy any new technology, but in particular, at what point should we deploy AV technology on roads? And I think there are very, very good and well-intentioned proponents of saying, well, look, we shouldn't have any of these vehicles out there driving around until they're 10 times as safe as humans. So we're just not going to accept errors by machines, even if we do accept errors by humans. And so really we should hold the bar incredibly high for any of this new technology. And I think from a sort of intuitive perspective, that makes a lot of sense. I think the trouble is that right now we have such a horrifying rate of fatalities and safety on roads in general. So in New Zealand, which tracks fairly similarly on a per capita basis to the US, but in the US we had 40,000 deaths on roads last year, and every year it's increased. This is despite COVID and people not driving as much. And that's just an astronomical number of lives that we're losing. And so if you had technology that was 50% safer than humans, you would be saving 10,000 of those lives every year, right? And so it doesn't, at the same time, even though you can sort of understand wanting to make sure that you hold the bar very, very high for new technology, at some point it becomes ethically incongruent to be preventing technology that is already provably safer than the existing status quo to be out there in the world. So that's sort of the philosophical, ethical question, which is not always what actually happens, because we still have public perception, which is harder to deal with. I think in terms of the more concrete side of, hey, we need to get vehicles out there and how do we actually use that? I mean, one of the things that has really advanced in the last 10 years is machine learning technology, and in particular, how we can leverage data and human demonstrations, for instance, to improve the performance of our automated systems. And that is for us at Nuro, that's a particularly relevant tool that we use. So we have a couple fleets of vehicles that we have right now. We have our custom vehicles that obviously have no one in them, and then we also have our Prius vehicles, which have all of the same sensors that we put on our custom vehicles, the same actuation, so they're fully self-driving. But because they can have a safety driver inside the driver's seat, we're able to add both an additional layer of safety, and we can also learn from demonstration. And so we have that safety driver drive normally through roads, and where our system can then take, using all of the sensor data that we've logged while the human is driving, the system can learn how does an expert human driver act in all of these situations, and how should our system act, and then effectively train our system to drive in a similar manner, or at least be able to explain why the human driver did what they did. And that's really, really useful for the fine-tuning and the optimization of your system, because at the end of the day, there's sort of, hey, we can design a system that doesn't hit things, but you also want the system to drive really, really well. And that being able to learn from expert drivers, that final set of steps is really, really valuable.
So we've seen recently, in fact, very recently, I think Argo shut down last week, which was a very well-funded autonomous drive company. And Nuro, I assume, is still going strong. How much are you relying on future technology in terms of, the exponential growth of AI capability, and how much can be done right now with the technology of today?
Yeah, so we feel pretty good about the technology that we've already developed and the roadmap that we have. We have our custom vehicles operating right now in both the Bay Area and in Texas. So fully driverless, driving on roads in our local communities. In fact, where our headquarters is in California. And so in order to do that, we had to get confident that our vehicle could outperform human drivers in those same areas in terms of safety. And so in many ways, that is a huge 0 to 1 moment for us as a company, and I think for the industry in general, is getting to that level of confidence. And so we feel really good about the path that we have in terms of technology being able to then expand it to further geographic regions, and ideally the entire US, and then internationally in the suburbs of Wellington, where my parents live eventually. And so from that side, we feel really good. I do think that some of the areas that we are hoping we see significant progress are around, sort of many of the classic areas of the cost of sensing, the cost of compute, the power consumption of compute. We have our 3rd generation vehicle. We already have all of the compute and the sensors that we're going to put on it. But we would love to be able to upgrade that over time, certainly from a pricing perspective, but hopefully also from an efficiency perspective in terms of the hardware, to make it better, cheaper, lower energy draw. But that won't fundamentally change whether or not we're able to scale a service. So it will help with the economics. I think it'll help on the scaling side, but we feel pretty good from a technological perspective that we're going to be able to deliver what we're shooting for.
I had a look. It looks like you're delivering Domino's pizzas and things like this. And I know your vision is to help local business, so to make things go local. Can you talk a bit more about that? And I guess it's a very strong value for Nuro that you're helping local communities.
Yeah, so if you think about one of the ways that we like to characterize our long-term product vision is, imagine what free local teleportation would enable, right? So we're building a local delivery service that we hope we will operate a fleet of vehicles that can transport things locally. So imagine anything within sort of half an hour. So that sort of driving distance. And one of the really nice things about that vision is that in the US in particular, over the last decade, we've seen the advent of, not the advent, but certainly the evolution of companies like Amazon and e-commerce. And that has presented a bit of a challenge for local businesses and local communities, because now I can get something from Amazon, overnight with free shipping. And that makes it more difficult for businesses that are local and trying to compete for my spend to actually do that competition. Once we have services like Nuro at scale, which can provide very, very low cost, local on-demand delivery, then suddenly the mom and pop retailer, or certainly the mom and pop restaurant that's in my community, can provide a better service than Amazon can for a lower cost. And that is going to completely flip the table and sort of turn the tide in terms of the competitive positioning. And what's interesting is that we're also seeing that. We're seeing some response from some of the big companies like Amazon to that, because the only way that you can provide that on-demand, incredibly fast, incredibly low-cost delivery is if you have a presence in the local community. And that is sort of the key unlock that's going to help enable the strengthening of the community's matters. That if there's the only way that I can provide 30-minute delivery to people living in my suburb or my neighborhood is if I have a store that can fulfill that order within that community. And so that is really the key. And it means that all of the local businesses that for a long time have had a lot of pricing pressure on having a local presence, like it's much more costly to have a store that's in the community than to have a warehouse way out in the other side of town. Suddenly they're going to get a much, much better product experience for their end consumers. And that's going to enable them to compete and I think have a much stronger positioning in the ecosystem going forwards. And that's what we're really excited about. And so for us, all of our partners have a local presence. Now, you mentioned correctly, like Domino's, what we've done is we've tried to partner with some of the biggest brands and the strongest players in various verticals. And we've done that for a couple of reasons. One is that we want to make sure that what we're building can serve all of the possible use cases. And so working with sort of the best of the best that are often the most demanding helps ensure that we are building the right thing and that we're holding ourselves to the right standard. And the second is that by building these large national or even international partnerships, they enable us to deploy our fleet in a new region and have the confidence that we already have enough demand to operate the entire fleet. And then once we do that, we can then partner with all of the local businesses once we have that fleet to then start providing deliveries from all of those local businesses as well. So I think you correctly pointed out it's absolutely part of our operating model and our vision to be doing deliveries for all of those local businesses. But part of the way that we get that to happen as fast as possible is by partnering with these larger organizations that still have the local presence to enable us to establish footholds.
So it leads on to my next question, which is around sort of scalability geographically. So we see a lot of autonomous vehicle researcher companies, in Texas and is it New Mexico and places where the legislation is very very kind. Obviously you've been thinking about other jurisdictions, perhaps Australia and New Zealand. Can you tell us a bit more about sort of the challenges, I suppose, of geographically scaling?
Yes, so maybe a couple of points there. One, you touched upon regulation. I do think that obviously regulation can immediately shut down the ability for new technology to be deployed, and so it does tend to be one of those necessary conditions. Obviously, it's not sufficient, but it's something that you have to make sure that regulation provides for it. In the US, it's a little bit complicated because we have federal regulation on vehicles, and then we have statewide regulation on drivers. And so if you're a self-driving car, you're sort of a vehicle plus a driver, and so you have to make sure that you're abiding by the regulations on both. However, there are roughly 20 states that allow for fully driverless self-driving vehicles today, and many more that are sort of coming soon. And so from the regulation side, we feel pretty good about it. For New Zealand and Australia, New Zealand, well, both of those countries are widely touted as being very innovative on the regulatory front. And I know personally, talking to the Ministry of Transportation many years ago about AV and what the stand should be, it was remarkably refreshing actually talking to folks in New Zealand, because it was like, hey, what sort of makes sense as regulation? Like what are the core considerations logically? What should we be concerned about? How should we be setting this up? And it was very much a principled discussion, as opposed to what is unfortunately sometimes the case in other places, where there are all sorts of political factions that you end up politicizing things that really hopefully could be more principled, like safety-based, innovation-based discussions. And so I do think it is a massive advantage of both New Zealand and Australia, the regulatory environment in general, and frankly that's why you see so many new innovations being tested there. Everything from drones, I know there's a lot of, and even eVTOL, AV stuff happening in New Zealand, as well as self-driving. I can say the self-driving regulation in New Zealand is very sensible, and today doesn't preclude any of this tech being deployed there.
Cool. We're almost coming to the end of our time, but there's a question I wanted to ask. So you're a Kiwi through and through, and I guess when you come home, Aotearoa is very different to the US. We operate in a much smaller market, different culture and those kind of things. Do you have any advice or thoughts around sort of the burgeoning industry in New Zealand? If people here want to be involved in robotics, automation and those sorts of things. Do you have any insights as a Kiwi based offshore?
Yeah, I think it's actually getting better and better. I think one of the lessons that all of us have learned through COVID is that remote work and even remote companies are faring a lot better than I think any of us would have expected prior to COVID, and the whole remote first, or at least remote capable businesses has become the new normal, which means that New Zealand can compete, I would say, in a much stronger fashion than ever before. So that's sort of more macro. I think having businesses in New Zealand and even having them be international but based in New Zealand, I think is going to only get stronger and stronger, because everyone wants to live there, and now there are less downsides in terms of the challenges of operating businesses from New Zealand. From the robotics side, one of the challenges that we deal with as a company is that it is very capital intensive, because hardware is very capital intensive. And so robotics, by definition, is some physical instantiation of technology. And so that does tend to require a little bit more capital. Now, I think that the former point around how businesses in New Zealand and other locations outside of Silicon Valley no longer have perhaps the disadvantage that they did in the past, I think bodes very well for new companies that are in New Zealand that are interested in robotics or anything, frankly, and their ability to raise capital, both from sort of the standard usual suspects of Silicon Valley, but also from other places. And I've also noticed that, New Zealand has an incredible diaspora and a very strong network. If there are folks that are thinking about robotics or even technology company, feel free to reach out to me, but there are a lot of really, really strong folks that have some experience now in various spaces, and as Kiwis, I think there's always a really strong community around people happy to help out.
Well, thank you for your time. I realise it's probably a busy part of the day in North America. I guess it was 6 years since we talked last, and my goodness, so much has happened. So I can only hope in 6 years' time we meet up again and we hear how Nuro has really reinvigorated local commerce. I think that's a great story. So thank you, Dave.
Awesome, thank you very much. Lovely seeing everyone. Thanks for your time today.
Folks, fascinating presentation. Dave, thank you so much for being with us. Can we also have a big hand for Matt Ensor? Great conversation. Thank you. Dave, we'll continue with our program. You're welcome to hang around as long as you wish, but I suspect you have things to do. Great to see you, mate. You're on a screen here, so I'm sort of looking at both. Folks, we're going to have now a presentation about AIMS, AIMES. It's the Australian Integrated Multi-modal Ecosystem. And Nick Collins, who's here to speak with us, is the AIMS Program Manager from the University of Melbourne. He also works as the Manager Transport Strategy at Victoria's Department of Transport. AIMS currently has over 60 partners, including state transport authorities, transport technology suppliers, local councils, local suppliers, and I know many of those partners are represented here in the room, and we've heard from some involved in the project through our time together. The project seeks to make better use of data and technology for safer and smarter mobility outcomes. I'm really excited that we've got Nick here with us to share his experiences. Nick, stage is yours, mate. Let's say hello.
Good morning. Good morning. There have been some great presentations so far. And I'm here to present about a fairly simple message in some ways that AIMS represents. And that's about enabling innovation, enabling many of the partners that we have to be able to do things in an environment in Melbourne. So I was a bit worried about going into the problem. In one sense, because I'm going to be speaking about three things with my AIMS hat on and maybe not my public sector hat on. But I'll ask you to put your hands up if you've done an innovation program and you've struggled with getting money for it. Okay, great, good. Yeah, me too. This is the one I'm a little nervous about because public sector, we need it, but it can be difficult in innovation. Keep your hands up if you've struggled with that. Again, yes, very much a struggle. And finally, I'm going to keep my hand up because I know I've struggled with this one too. Time. So, innovation, we need money to do it. That's all true. Procurement, we've got to go through the right systems and channels to get things done, especially in government. And time, money can be limited, resources can be limited, so these can all be limiting. AIMS doesn't necessarily solve all of that from a government perspective, but it has its own internal ways to make some things happen. So I'll get into what is AIMS. So there are a lot of big words on the screen right there, and they are true. There is 100 kilometres of road space in AIMS. There are over 80 intersections. We've got about 40 computer and machine learning scientists in the AIMS testbed. At the University of Melbourne, we have over 50 partners now, 10,000 sensors, so taking in data from SCATs, from Bluetooth sensors, from video analytic devices, from the current ticketing system, and all combined to form what is AIMS. So if you don't know Melbourne, this is broadly Melbourne here. AIMS is the green square, and that's it. So it's just north of the CBD of Melbourne and just east of the University of Melbourne. You can see we actually don't have a rail line running through AIMS at the moment. There's one that will be built very soon. We'll see. There is the busiest cycling corridor that goes through Rathdown Street, north-south. There are tram routes, bus routes, there's events, there's lots of night activity. It's a complex happening system. So a really, really good system to be testing out transport technology. We have some objectives at AIMS. They're pretty uniform. To make urban transport safer, cleaner, efficient, sustainable and integrated. That covers off pretty much everyone's, I think. Better strategies and policy making for automated vehicle and smart infrastructure. And support and facilitate emerging technologies and quantify what the connected transport network of the future will be. So that's a lot of words. It's all about facilitating innovation is where I'd say. So AIMS has a lot of partners. And I'm gonna skip over this slide. Actually, I'm not gonna skip over this slide. I'll get to the partners in a second. Because this is a really important slide about the context of Victoria, and I think the first sentence is really important to think about. So, 200 lives lost per year in Victoria alone on the roads. That's something that I think is funny we accept as just the price of travelling, but it's not something we should accept. And I think that everyone here today, thinking about Towards Zero here in New Zealand, would agree with that. Secondly, we see the cost of congestion as well in Victoria, 1,700 per resident, and set to rise. Forecast to rise threefold by 2050. I don't know where that's from, but that's a lot of money. as well, and something that we don't need to accept. So AIMS, we're saying we can work with network intelligence. We bring together partners to help us with network intelligence, to really be thinking about how we take that data from all those sensors and apply it in a way that enables us to make better policy decisions and have safer networks. So what does AIMS cover? I feel like I've spoke about it, but I haven't really explained what it is yet. AIMS brings together three pretty important industries. So it brings together government, of which I'm a part. So AIMS has local government and now 2 state governments in Australia. So Department of Transport Victoria and Transport for New South Wales SCATS as members of AIMS. Obviously there's academia, so the University of Melbourne runs AIMS and has the founding director, which is Majid Savi, Professor Majid Savi. And finally, there's industry. So all these three coming together, AIMS is all about bringing them together. Government wants to build better social outcomes, respond to needs of citizens, maintain systems, I've just made these up. Academia wants to learn, discover, educate and provide practical visions to problems, and industry wants to innovate and improve, grow, find opportunities to deliver. I've never worked in industry, so I assume that's what you guys want to do. But AIMS wants to bring those together, and I don't think that government can innovate themselves, or I think they probably can, but they probably do it a bit poorly, spend a bit too much money doing it. So they need to learn and discover, and they need to innovate and improve, and funnily enough, academia and industry can facilitate that, and AIMS is about bringing that together. So the governance, the way AIMS is set up is we have 2 foundational partners, and that's the Department of Transport Victoria and the University of Melbourne. So the Department of Transport Victoria provides the space that AIMS operates in. It facilitates projects to occur within AIMS. It effectively gets all the benefits of investment coming into Victoria and testing out transport technologies across Victoria. The University of Melbourne runs the program, connects in all the students to all the projects underway. So that's why there's a really symbiotic relationship between the university and the department. By having more investment and testing more and getting more information into Victoria, we can understand what's going on in our own network and we can make better policy decisions. And for the university, by having projects underway, they attract more students. So it's a win-win for both. Our executive group, so we have a number of then Tier 1 members, many of whom are here today, and they form many of the projects and the deliverables that AIMS does. So government or the university isn't necessarily testing their own things, but we're inviting in our partners to test for us. We're inviting in partners that you've heard from today and partners that I'll talk about shortly to do some work. The AIMS sits, we have a executive board where the University of Melbourne, Department of Transport have 2 votes. The AIMS executive group, the Tier 1 members each have a vote. So we all go about collaborating and forming the direction of AIMS together. We have Tier 2 members, and they may be members that just want to take part in AIMS and see what can we do here, what's the opportunity that AIMS can provide us. So looking at doing smaller projects or larger projects, but we have many across the Tier 1 and Tier 2. So here's a few, and I keep meaning to update this slide because it's old and it's grown, but at least it represents some of the members that we currently have contributing. So I'll go into the pilot soon, but what we deliver rapid testing and deployment of new technology and solutions. So where government sometimes can struggle to really quickly get something out on the network and test and have multiple partners test, that's where AIMS can come in. If there are problem statements that the state government wants to find out more about, they can present those to AIMS, and AIMS can work with partners to find solutions and apply them on the road. So not theoretical, not hypothetical, but actually on the road. I've spoken about the industry and academic attraction, the technology diffusion. So the whole point of AIMS, it's not to do small pilots and then kind of walk away from that, but it's to inform state government, our state government, Australia state government, New Zealand state government, about what has happened and what can be done differently. So national leadership, again, that's where AIMS really comes to the forefront of doing the bleeding edge of technology and saying what we can do. So proven commercial track record, more than 50 industry partners. I think they can probably talk about that more than I can. So what have we done? AIMS does a lot of pilots and trials, and I'll speak about some that are underway right now. We do a lot of infrastructure on the road, so cameras, a lot of video analytic devices, Wi-Fi sensors. We've just completed one of our first SCATS integrations with an RSU that I think Capture's spoken about as well. But we also do in-vehicle devices. So this is a test where we deployed cameras on trams. So we have the largest tram network, I think, potentially anywhere in Melbourne. And these trams track queues and congestion as they went around the network, and that was displayed in a central system back at AIMS, so we could actually understand in real time where there were congestions and queues. And it was a different way to think about it. So we traditionally get that information from loop detectors under the ground, which can be fairly flawed. And so how can we use video analytic devices to better understand the system? And rather than having them stationary, you put them on a tram. And I know that that's something that's definitely coming up now more and more. I think even with our small mobility devices, with e-scooters, we're looking at doing something similar. And asset maintenance and queue detection can be real outcomes from that. I'm going to speak about briefly a trial, a CITS trial, and I've gone under it. I've gone past this a few times, but I've gone after Nick Knoll, who's done this extensively, and so you're probably going to get a really shorthand version from me. But in Melbourne, we did a trial with Lexus, which concluded this year. The trial had 3 components to it. So one was to speak to our infrastructure and receive information from the traffic intersections. One was to receive information from our trams, and one was to receive information from emergency vehicles. And so the use cases displayed, I think the really interesting ones, or they're all really interesting, but I think the tram one was really interesting to me as it kind of hit home, that in Melbourne, when you are in a mixed environment where you have trams in the middle of the road, so light rail in the middle of the road, and you have cars with that, when passengers need to alight or depart, that's a pretty unsafe environment. It's away from signalised intersections, and you're quite often, for those who haven't been to Melbourne, a lot of the trams don't look like the new one in there, but a lot of them are quite old, and they'll stop. As the door opens, a little stop sign will come out, and that's all that you get if you're a driver to say, hey, passengers might be coming out, don't run them over, please. So what we did here was we connected up the OBU on a tram and the Lexus vehicle, and so as a tram was stopping, it would receive an alert that, hey, there's a tram stopping, be prepared to stop yourself. Another one which happens quite often and is a costly area for the department is trams and cars running into each other. And trams can't deviate very, very easily. Cars are a little bit better at that. So when trams are going forward and a car wants to take a right turn over that tram line, and they're usually looking for oncoming traffic or maybe pedestrians, they'll receive an alert about, hey, there's a tram coming as well, you better watch out for that. Emergency vehicles were another one, and effectively, and we're copying what TMR have done and taking that. So thank you, Nick. Reporting from where emergency vehicles are located to where a vehicle is located, and that seems reasonable, doesn't seem too crazy, but in an urban environment, in a congested urban environment where you don't know, you hear an emergency vehicle coming, you don't know where it is, well, this will tell you where it's coming from. So it's been a really, out on a test track, you think, yeah, that's cool, but then actually in an urban realm, it becomes a whole lot more important. Finally, a really good one that we just got over the line was to communicate from our traffic, our infrastructure, DOT's infrastructure, directly to the vehicle. So we did this on Nicholson Gertrude Street in the CAPS corridor for the first one, and we've completed 2 more since then. We've effectively taken live data from the signal box next to the intersection, translated that to SPAT, signal phasing and timing message that was delivered via DSRC, that's the European standard of communication to the vehicle, and worked flawlessly. So in all three tests, it's worked flawlessly. And I think that the next step with this is to really think about scaling the use cases, more than just some test vehicles that are driving out there, but really utilising, well, who's actually out there on the road and who could benefit from this, and why don't we think about making those safety benefits happen right now for all our users. So Capture Intelligence Corridor, I think Capture have spoken about this before. Really interesting one that's coming up and incorporating a whole lot of data pieces from the department. This is a great use case where, you know, AIMS is facilitating this to happen, where it could have happened in any Australian city. By having AIMS in Melbourne, we've got to have this happen in Melbourne. And that's, you know, the department isn't funding this, but we've still got this here, and we've brought this investment into Melbourne. So that's taking in a whole lot of data, putting it in a back end and creating better outcomes for transport operators. So ultimately, we get a safer system, the department gets a safer system on a corridor, on a congested, potentially unsafe corridor, and we're putting in time. So I think that's a massive win for us, coming from the department's point of view. Another one, Cisco, and I'm speaking just before Cisco get up. So this one is a huge data gap that we have in the department. You know, we always speak around releasing real-time information to customers. We always, you know, speak around understanding our networks better, but it can be really difficult. You know, we can use GTFSR in our own ticketing systems and whatnot, but how do you understand how many people are on a platform at a station? So Cisco have come and worked with AIMS and the department, and they've put Wi-Fi routers at both ends of the station, of one of our busiest stations in Melbourne, and they have actually found a way, and I'll show you a video in a second, which is beautiful, to effectively show. Oh, go back. Can I get this video played? To effectively show where people are, and there we go, video's playing, thank you. Directly on a platform. So at the moment, this is used for station management. So, you know, thinking around crush management at stations and how do you better manage that. But what's really what I'm hoping that this data leads to is better information for customers, especially coming out of COVID. And I'll show you our public transport stats a little later. So you can see here we have Melbourne Central Station. We can see when people alight, disembark, get onto the station. But when we go down, you can actually see exactly where they're coming from. So what escalators, what platform are they going to, when are they coming off? This data is so rich and has so many opportunities for us to release and provide better outcomes to our customers. So this is just one example of one pilot in a train station. And you can see here, we're going through all the different platform arrivals and where they're going and why. So I've spoken to Simon about some opportunities we can take from that. Last thing I want to speak about is how AIMS can also help enact policy for the government. So Victoria, we released a transport sector emission pledge, you know, more zero emission vehicles, but one that was really, and I saw the ministry, they produced something, they wanted 10 times the more active transport. We want 7% more, and that's a big ask, I thought. So I'm really impressed that you're going for 10 times more. We currently have about 18% of trips done by active transport, and we want 25% of trips done by active transport by 2030. Now, if you have a look, this is Melbourne. You know, Melbourne had some awful lockdowns. I was stuck with my partner. We decided to move in together at the start of COVID and have surprisingly stayed together, so it's good. You can see the blue line is road data. Every lockdown we get a dip in road data, but it comes up pretty quickly. The light blue line is public transport data, goes down. There's a little bit more cautious about coming up. People are a little bit worried about COVID, but slowly comes back up. If we look at active transport data, and I've taken this out and haven't done it very nicely because I'm not a statistician, you know, I like those sad people, like Nick said, we see a trend down. And this could be, you know, many different variables, but we see you know, the department doesn't have enough sensors for cyclists, number one, and they're probably all biased because they're located in where people are going into the city. And as trips change because of COVID, that could be the reason why, but it could also be a reason that less people are riding than we thought. So we have a challenge where we want to increase active transport by a massive amount, but we see active transport decreasing. So what can we do about it? This was in Ames, the busiest cycling corridor we have. We can get up to 20,000 cyclists a day, which is phenomenal. It's huge, but there's no road space. You can't just put on a bigger bike lane. It's way too political. You can't take out all the car parking. There are schools there. It's just impossible to change the urban realm for this as it stands. It's just too built. So how else can we think around enabling cyclists to get through these routes and really show the state that there are other opportunities that aren't just pop-up bike lanes or heavy infrastructure to get the outcomes you want? So we partnered with GridSmart, part of Cubic, to use video analytics to connect into SCATs and automatically detect cyclists on approach to intersections. So we had 3 use cases we looked at here. One is that cyclists on approach, how can we ensure that they get the green light? So now we can measure if there are 2 or more cyclists approaching an intersection, we'll hold a green light for them. The second use case is when they depart an intersection and we're fairly sure that they're going to go to the next one, we can send that information up. So we understand then that, hey, they're likely not going to deviate. They're going to keep going forward. And then you can have a static green wave. So you can think, okay, now we need 30 seconds, the next intersection, get ready to produce that green wave. And the last one is we have weird hook turns for cyclists where they need to go and press a button to get a hook turn. So you see in that picture there or there's a cyclist in the hook turn zone, and now they don't need to push that button. So they just go in there, they arrive, and they get the signal called for them, and we have some signage that shows them what to do. Just going through, that's some more. So there's what I've said before. And that's it from me, really. So as I said, enabling innovation, enabling our partners to innovate, and really seeking to make those benefits available for government.
You up for some questions?
Do I have questions?
Would you be up for some questions?
Oh, yeah, I'm up for questions.
Are you prepared to face the panel?
Please.
We've got one here. Julie, the mic is yours.
I got a question. I'm interested to know how it's worked with all your partners. Who takes the leadership role in this? With all the partnerships and all the complexity of government happening?
It was who takes the leadership role with all the partners coming in?
With all of these, because that's one of the things.
We might have to swap the mic out, but we'll just have a look at that. But I think you've heard the question. Thank you for reframing it. Do you want to tackle that? I'll fix the mic. Well, my friend.
It's a really good question because you think
that'll do it.
You would think that getting all these various industry bodies who are potentially competitors to come in and work on one in one program could be difficult, but I think that everyone's after the same outcome, and that's to grow and benefit. And by enabling this, I think we can spread the love. I think we can. The university, the department, they're not looking for projects at this stage, and we're not putting in heaps of. The department's not putting in money, but it's a showcase opportunity for these groups. So I think that it's about reframing potentially what the benefit is for the industry bodies coming in.
Perfect. We've got one up here.
With the new e-scooter and shared bike trials coming into South Yarra and the City of Melbourne, is there much integration or utilisation of that data coming through within the AIMS project? If not, why not?
Good question. No, there probably hasn't been enough. Not that. I guess I would caution that it's the industry